welcome to my world. I'm your host, Kevin Rutherford. It is Monday, August 7th. We are here live. It's a free-for-all right now. We've got about 30 minutes, and then I'm going to have a guest on. So jump in with your questions. I don't have a whole lot to open today. So line them up. Phone lines are open. 855-950-3835 is the number to join us. Coming up in about 30 minutes, I'm going to be joined by Joe Rakovats. Joe is I'll announce Joe when he gets here in a little bit. But what we're doing is inviting all of the other speakers from the NASDAQ conference to join us here on the air. I believe Joe has been a speaker there for like 11 years now. So Joe will be joining us today. We'll talk about the NASDAQ conference. We'll probably also talk a lot about what's going on in California. Everything from AB5 to CARB. It's kind of Joe's specialty. Works for the Western States Trucking Association. So line up the calls. We'll hear from Joe here in about 30 minutes. And then after the interview, we can go back to live calls. It is a free-for-all today. So I'll stay here as long as you've got questions. It's official. It looks like Yellow filed for bankruptcy sometime last night. So it will proceed as a bankruptcy now, and we'll see what happens with all of that. There's a lot to work out. I tried looking at their financial structure, and it's a little confusing. I think their real estate's held by a different company. They have a brokerage that, from what I gather, does fairly well. So this is going to be a long, complicated bankruptcy. I certainly hope if there's any money left, it goes back to the taxpayers, but I kind of doubt it. Bankruptcies, especially this big, can get really complicated. They will be fighting this for a long time as far as who. So basically what has to happen in a bankruptcy is the bankruptcy court starts to liquidate assets. They start selling things that have a value, and then they pay off creditors, and they have to pay off creditors in a specific order. But that order can get very complicated in a large bankruptcy like this. So we'll wait to see what happens. It'd be nice to see the taxpayers get some of that money back, if there's anything left. I have no idea. All right, did I have anything else? I think I'll get to the call since we only have a half hour. Let's get started in Oregon today. Stephen, welcome to the program.
Hey, good morning, Kevin. This Mac character, M-A-C, now I don't want to get him confused with Matt. This Mac character that I've heard on the Spaces, who on Thursday is totally against. So we need some federal laws against this guy from being allowed to call in and talk like he does. He calls in, complains about the double brokering, but then he participates in it, and then doesn't even complain. He doesn't go to the right sources to tell about it. He just, because it's $4 a mile, he's okay with it all of a sudden. But then him and I got on a discussion. He's trying to say, because I'm a lease operator, I lease on to a carrier. I don't run under my own authority. That I'm not a business owner. Because I'm leased on to a carrier. So he's trying to say I act like an employee and, blah, blah, blah. So I said, well, I filed a federal, a business tax return. I have no problem if you want to talk numbers. Let's compare, because I also told them
let's do this.
Yeah, 56.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Let's do this. So one of the things I don't like to do is talk about other people if they're not here. So if Mac wants to join, although I probably wouldn't even recommend that. And before we go on to the topic that we will talk about, Mac and I go back a long ways. Remember when the whole idea of going to D.C. with the trucks, I think it might have been around 17, maybe over the ELD issue. It was a big deal. It was happening all the time. They had their event each year, and I was highly critical of that. I still would be. I think it's a bad idea. I think the way it was handled was all wrong. That was when Mac and I first started butting heads. And I will say one thing about Mac. He's passionate about what he talks about. I have not found in the past that he resorts to any kind of personal attacks. He can debate. He's like a pit bull when he gets his teeth into something. But for the most part, it never got personal between him and I. And after a while, I realized I don't want to do this anymore. There are some people that I don't want to debate with, not because I can't or whatever. Just at some point, you realize we're not getting anywhere with this. So, and over time, him and I have kind of mellowed out. We'll still go at it once in a while, but for the most part, he has his opinions, I have mine. It's not that big of a deal. So, like I said, I would rather not turn this into a big debate either way. But I will talk about that issue, just separate from any person, because I have heard this so many times over the years. If you're leased to a carrier, you're just a glorified employee. That's just not true. Are there some cases where it might be true? Of course. There are lots of people that get into this business and don't really run it as a business, but it really doesn't have anything to do with whether you're leased to a carrier or not. So one of the examples I would give, my own operation, I had my own authority for a while. I'd gone back and forth. There was a time where I had my own authority and had trucks leased to carriers. And then I gave up my authority and stayed primarily leased to FedEx. Now, I don't know how you could not call that a business. I owned the trucks. I hired the drivers. I didn't drive myself at all. I generated revenue with other people driving my trucks. And at the end, I sold the entire contract for a pretty darn nice profit. So how could that not be a business?
Well, and I would love for him to come on and explain to me that as well, because he can't tell me how I'm acting as an employee. I invited him onto your show.
Yeah, and
I invited him onto your show to compare our.
We could do that.
I'll show him my business tax return.
Right. Yeah, we could do that. I just don't like to talk about people and, beat on them when they're not here to defend themselves. So if we want to do that, maybe we do it on a space or whatever, that'd be fine. But my opinion on this is pretty clear. I also know people at FedEx that have multi-million-dollar businesses. And all of their trucks are leased to FedEx. So I don't know how you could not call that a business. Some guys that generate, and I'm not talking about millions in gross revenue, I'm talking about millions in profit. There are guys over there with big fleets. And there are other carriers as well that allow owner-operators to become small fleet owners but stay leased to them. There are lots of that going on. So to say that's not a business just doesn't make any sense at all. And even one truck, one driver, it's a business. And it's not that they're just trying to pay you to get around the laws. I get to buy my truck, spec my truck, operate the truck the way I want. Could there be some controls? Sure. In a lot of operations, there's a ton of control. My trucks had to be painted white. They had to have all the proper logos on them that FedEx wanted. Myself and all my drivers had to wear uniforms. I get that. But I've had other businesses in my life where you deal with the demands of the customer. And that's what this is. I lease my truck to a customer, and that customer, we can negotiate what kinds of things they want. That doesn't make it not a business, though.
I get compensated and that's where he was, because I only get paid I earn 56% of the line haul, and the company keeps 44. Well, that's too much. They're taking too much. You need to go check your contract and make sure that's more double than that.
Hold on, because I don't like that phrase. This is the same thing talking about brokers. Who gets to decide too much? I do. It's my business.
That's my
point.
Not
you, not anybody else. I get to decide.
If I sign...
Yeah, go ahead.
If I signed a contract where I agreed for them to keep 80% and I only want 20 because I'm a hobbyist at this, that's between me and the business owner, not anybody else.
Well, let's think about this. In FedEx's case, FedEx couldn't possibly pay a percentage of anything. They have to pay line haul miles. So what? I have no idea how much revenue was generated by all the packages that I moved around for FedEx this week. It's impossible to know. They get moved from trailer to trailer. We drop trailers, pick up other trailers. It's impossible to know, but I guarantee you, I generated a ton of revenue for FedEx. Packages pay a lot. I could care less. All I care about is how much I got paid, and I agreed to that and signed a contract.
Yeah, and then I have no problem with them keeping 44%. And so I call it, I pay them 44% for their services, and I get compensated pretty well with my 56%. Well, he's like, you don't pay for the service. They take it from me. I'm like, no, I pay that. I pay them. That's
just semantics. It doesn't matter how we say it. That's just semantics. Those are just words. I've always looked at it that way too, and I try to get owner-operators to look at that. You are paying that carrier for the part of the job that they did. They went out and sold the contract. That's the big one. They had to go out and pound on doors and say, we want to move your freight. They had to sell it. You don't have to do that. That you're paying them for that. They manage, they collect the money, they have the insurance in place. They do a lot for their part, and you are paying them to do those things for you rather than go get your own authority and do it yourself. Now, what about people who use a broker and a dispatch service? I know lots of owner-operators with their authority that pay a broker to go to do the same thing, sell the freight, bill the freight, that kind of stuff. Then they also, on top of that, pay a dispatch service to go find them freight and keep them organized. How is that any different?
Yeah.
And then they might be paying another service to do their fuel tax reporting, and they're paying somebody to belong to a drug consortium. So there's a lot of things that have to happen to move freight down the road. And if you have your own authority and you choose to do all of them yourself, fantastic. If you lease to a carrier and let them do it, that's fine too. If you use a broker and a dispatch service and you let them do some of it and you pay them, they're all just different business models. None of them are right or wrong. I have my opinion about some. I think it's kind of crazy to go get your own authority and then pay a bunch of little companies to do all this other stuff. And how is that different from leasing to one company and paying them to do all this stuff? It's not. It's the same thing. And here's another deal. I promise you, I can go find trucking companies right now that I could go lease to that would only take 10%. They basically just let me rent their authority from them, and I do everything else. I go find all my loads. I do my own fuel tax. I have my own fuel card. I give them 10%. I can find a dozen or more of those companies today that you wouldn't make anywhere near what you're making giving up 40-some%. So this is just math.
I did it back in the mid-2000s. I had my own authority, but I didn't have my own trailer. So I had my own authority, and I would use a trucking company out of Maine, and they would rent me a trailer, and they would broker me freight that they have in their own system. But I was still running under my own authority. But they're using their trailer.
I know people who have their own authority and primarily work for one broker and one broker only.
Yeah.
I had the guy on the show he ended up becoming the small carrier of the year for C.H. Robinson. The whole year he only ran for C.H. Robinson. He had his own authority. He was brand new. It was like his second year in business. He called me and he was struggling, and I gave him the idea. I said, why don't you find 3 to 5 good brokers, build a relationship, stop chasing all this freight on the load board. And he called me back. Actually, he didn't call me. C.H. Robinson called me and invited me to speak at their annual awards ceremony. And it was because of this guy. He told them the story of why he was doing this. So then the owner-operator called me, and he took my lesson one step further. Instead of 3 to 5 good brokers, he looked at C.H. Robinson. He said, they have freight everywhere I go. Why don't I just work with them? And he built a relationship with 2 or 3 agents in C.H. Robinson's system, and he had an awesome year.
Nice. Another topic just before I get off. That driver with the 2016 Freightliner talking about these maintenance costs on these new trucks.
Yeah.
I've got a 2018 Cascadia. My wife and I have put every single mile on this truck, and we've got 915,000 miles on it. With that, I've put on 2 sets of brake pads. The rotors are still original. The calipers are still original. The one box is still original. My clutch is original. I've got maybe 6 grease fittings on the truck total.
Right.
So my maintenance cost, I've replaced the water pump once, I've replaced the alternator once, the starter once, and the radiator once. Everything else is original on this truck. So at 915,000 miles. So if that guy wants to go talk about maintenance costs on these new trucks, this thing has been extremely well to us on maintenance.
It really is, now that we've figured out maintenance. One of the other things that happened during that decade plus where we were avoiding emission trucks at all cost, lots of other things improved. Manufacturing processes, materials, and we weren't really paying attention. And all of a sudden we started really focusing on these newer trucks. And the same thing is happening with with trucks that happened with cars. We used to, if you grew up my age and you owned a car and you worked on it yourself, you were working on it constantly. Starters, alternators, belts, hose, you just worked on them. Spark plugs, points, condensers. There was just a lot of work. Fuel filters you were always replacing. You don't do that anymore. You basically just drive a car and once in a while maybe do something to it. Trucks are like that now. And once we realized, hey, if we figure out the emissions, these trucks really, they go a long way between things breaking or needing replacement. But there's something else that occurred in the last couple of years. The cost of everything went up. So when we look at cost per mile on these trucks for maintenance, it seems high. We're basically double where we were 10 years ago on cost per mile for maintenance. On any truck, though, the older trucks, if you still have them, are also costing that much now. It's not that they're breaking down more. It's the cost of repairing everything has gone up.
Yeah. I don't know, man. This truck's been really good. Our oil sample at 915,000, our oil samples are still extremely clean. And back in January, I lost all oil pressure in the engine due to a part failure. All oil pressure, the shop thought I would have lost my engine. So, the oil samples are still clean.
Excellent. Hey, Stephen, I'm gonna cut you loose. I just remembered I have a guest at the half hour, which is unusual for me. So I want to knock out a couple more calls before we get to it. Paul, welcome.
Howdy. You had a caller on Friday that's looking for a truck for a fuel tanker, tow a fuel tanker.
Yeah.
Although they are sleeper cabs, they are spec'd very well as the ex-Ploger trucks. They might be a little bit heavy, I don't know.
That's the biggest issue with hauling a tanker is that it pays by the payload, so you want to save every pound you can. So having the sleeper, it doesn't make sense. We do get slightly better aerodynamics with the sleeper. We could get a little better fuel economy, but it's not worth the trade-off when you lose that much payload.
Yeah, he could. Another place he could look is Loves and Flying J fuel tankers, because they're always selling that.
It used to be
perfectly for the job.
Used to be a very, very common thing before. Who was it? Was it White that brought out the first integral sleeper? It might have been White Volvo. I'm trying to remember now. I don't know. But prior to integral sleepers, it was very, very common for a new sleeper truck to go to an over-the-road fleet. They'd put their million miles, they'd put 400,000 or 500,000 miles on it, would go to the secondary market. An owner-operator might pick it up and put another 400,000 or 500,000 on it. And then when it went to sell again, it was very, very likely they would just pull the sleeper off of it and close up that little hole on the back and make it a day cab, because day cabs hold their value better than sleepers do, because there's not enough of them usually. And that happens even more now. Day cabs hold their value even better, because if you wanted to turn one of these things into a day cab, it would cost you a fortune. You'd have to be cutting the sleeper off, and sleepers used to just bolt on and have a little hole that you crawled through to get back there, and they were really easy to take off and just put a panel where that hole was.
Yep. So, and that previous caller, I don't know what his revenue is, but if the carrier he's leased to, maybe he's running at $5 a mile. 56% of that is $2.80.
He does extremely.
Maybe he's running at $8 a mile. I don't know. So,
he does extremely well. Yeah. So to say it's not a business is just like I said. I've heard this over and over and over. I don't know why we want now. If we take that next step to a lease purchase, yes, they still have to file a business tax return, but we could certainly argue that it's not much of a business. I mean, this isn't black and white. This is very, very nuanced. You know, when I had my trucks at FedEx maintained a ton of control over my operation. So what? I don't care. I agreed to that. I'm okay with that. That was the deal. I have lots of customers that demand things from me as a business, not even as a trucking company. And the idea is you should try to keep your customers happy. That's how you make money.
Well, the carrier I'm leased to for over 19 years, they have very little control over me. They want the DOT number and the name on the door, and I use the e-log that they want me to use, and they supply me a fuel card with a good discount, so I use that. And they have national accounts for tires, so I use that, and pretty much I do whatever else I want.
And there's
and mostly our fleet looks like a jar of jelly beans. Pick a color. They're all of them.
Yeah, well, so,
I don't care.
And there's this, like I said, it's nuanced. It's all over the board. Some companies exert very little control. Some companies exert lots of control. But that doesn't change the fact that this is a business. Like I said, we could argue the lease purchase, but even them, it's a business. They just don't have a lot of control over their own business. And we all get to pick and choose how much control we might want to give up, how much money we want to make, but it's a business. Let's go to Texas. Bill, welcome to the program. Hey, I'm going to let people know that. Good. Real quick, I want to let people know if you're on hold right now or if you're calling in right now. Normally, if we were going to have a guest, we would turn off the phones, but I can't do that right now. So if you're calling in, we will be going to a guest here in probably after this call. But you can hold, and then we'll go back to questions after that. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah. I had my authority, and I saw the writing on the wall when the economy was about ready to tank. And then I leased onto an open deck carrier because that's all I do. And it's like night and day. I don't even look at a load board because most of our freight and most of the brokers agents I deal with don't post stuff on the board. And I keep 75% of it, but the average rate that I'm getting is $3 and plus a mile. So for the people that are saying, well, you're just a glorified company driver, all right, so be it, but I get to pick and choose my own freight and go where I want and take off when I want.
Yeah, the idea of even using that phrase glorified, company driver, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
It's a business.
Nope.
We have lots of risk. We get to make lots of our own decisions. Here's one big decision you get to make. If you don't like that lease, you can go sign another one. It's your truck. You take it wherever you want. Lease purchase becomes so restrictive in that you don't own the vehicle. You don't get to make decisions about the vehicle. You can't take the vehicle to other places. But I will say that is still a business. They have the same risk. They file the same tax returns. It's a business. They've just given up an awful lot of control of their own business. But so what? That we all get to make those decisions.
Yep. That's all I wanted to say. I just wanted to give my 2 cents.
All right. Perfect. Thanks for the call. I can probably then squeeze in another one before our guest. Let's go to Iowa. Robert, welcome.
Hey, Kev. Sent you over my numbers.
Sure. Let's go over them. Did you send something over for
me? No,
me?
this is through July.
Yep. I've got them here. Hold on. All right, so we are looking at January to July of 2023, so very, very current. Gross revenue per mile, $2.24 a mile. That's all miles. That is still a very, very strong number. It's interesting. One of the topics I was going to talk about this morning, several trucking companies are announcing and releasing numbers. We're in earnings season. Lots of articles about what's going on with truck earnings. And I keep seeing this headline that these trucking companies are complaining that we're still bouncing along the bottom. And when is it going to end? And then a couple predictions said it will end at the end of this year. And I thought to myself, I'm not even sure we've found the bottom yet. A lot of people I talk to certainly are nowhere near what I would consider a freight bottom, and you're one of them. And then the idea that it's going to end at the end of this year, why? Why would anybody predict that? What's going to change? I think, if anything, it could be worse at the end of this year. I still think we're looking for a bottom. And when I see numbers like yours, like what's this freight recession they're talking about? So then we look at your expenses. Excellent job of controlling your expenses. Your fuel's 43 cents a mile. There's some weird numbers here I need to go over.
I know what you're gonna.
I know
what you're gonna hammer me on.
Two things that are confusing, and I'm wondering if they have anything to do with each other. Your maintenance is only 4 cents a mile. What's going on with that?
Mm-hmm. I just bought it November of last year.
Okay.
And
then
just haven't had a lot of
that's
maintenance yet.
Maintenance is one of those things that can be crazy high for a couple months because we bought a new set of tires or a clutch or something big, and then it's just got to smooth out. Or it can be too low when we're in one of those cycles where we just haven't bought anything big in a while. That's fine then. The other one, what do you put under fees? Why is that number so big?
What's our fees? What do you put in the fees? I'm not really sure.
It's unusual. Normally, fees are things like, ATM fees and bank fees, and it's usually less than a penny a mile, but yours is 22 cents a mile. There's some big numbers going in there.
Yeah. It might be the expenses through the company we're leased to, like insurance might be in there. I'm not sure.
That if that's the case, that's fine. There are some right and wrong ways to do accounting, but we have some leeway. And if you wanted to group things like that, you can. I tell people don't group anything that you might be able to change. Insurance would be one. I wouldn't want to group insurance with other things because occasionally I might want to go out and try to see if I can get a lower insurance cost. And I would want to be able to see that expense separately. So you might want to just go through that list and see if there's anything you should be breaking out, because that's a really big number.
Okay.
But other than that, your numbers look fantastic. You're profiting $1.24 a mile, and you must be a team, right?
Yes.
Yeah, because you got 106,000 miles already this year. You're also basically at $132,000 in profit this year. So congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, this account has 0 deadhead. So
are you
one stop to the other? Are
you leased to a carrier? You must be. You said that.
Yes.
Oh, but geez, how do you make $130,000 in 6 months if you don't own a business?
We really negotiated.
Yeah, exactly. So that whole idea that, if you're leased to a carrier, it's not a business. I've heard it for years and years. Just doesn't make any sense. Congratulations. You've got an awesome business going here.
Awesome. I appreciate it, Kevin.
All right. We are going perfect timing. We are going to jump over to our guest right now. I see we've got him in there. We got a couple callers on hold. If you want to call in and hold, you can. We'll go back to calls and questions after our guest. So let's, without further ado, let's bring our guest in. We are being joined by Joe Rakovats. Joe is the Director of Governmental Affairs at the Western States Trucking Association. Joe's been working for nonprofit trucking associations for 7 years, focused primarily on small business advocacy. And Joe is also a former owner-operator knows the business very, very well. So let's welcome him in. Joe, good morning.
Good morning. 17 years, by the way, Kevin,
What did I say?
on the nonprofit. 7.
Did I really? I was looking right at the number 17. I don't know how I said 7. Sorry about that.
Oh, I do that too. I get my kids' names mixed up sometimes, you know.
I usually end up calling the kids the dog's name half the time. So it's
Oh, well, I've got my daughter's dog here. Well, she's deployed, and I know that feeling too.
Yeah, there you go. So the reason we're having you on is you're just a brilliant guy that knows all kinds of things about the owner-operator world. And it might be because you're also one of the speakers at the NASTIC conference this year. I think that's what we're doing here. We've invited all of the other speakers on. This is my first time at the event, period. Certainly the first time speaking there, so I'm pretty excited about doing the keynote. But you've been speaking there now 11 years, is that right?
This will be my 11th year, yes.
Fantastic.
As a
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, David Owen, it surprised me initially, working for a competing trade association. You generally don't see that sort of thing happen, but it certainly did here. And like I say, it'll be my 11th year given a breakout session on pretty much, all issues West Coast, California, pretty specifically.
Yeah, which there's always issues to talk about in California. So we'll probably touch on a few of those here, too, because that's you're kind of my go-to source for that kind of stuff. So, it doesn't surprise me knowing David that he would invite you, even though you may have been at a competing association. David operates like he doesn't have any competition, which I kind of like.
It is, you mentioned it's going to be your first time. It is an amazing, when I say an amazing conference, I've been to a lot of different trade conferences, and I actually do consider this to be one of the best. And the venue is just second to none there at the Omni in Nashville, and attached to the Country Music Hall of Fame. There's always a private concert on a Friday night. Last year was the Oak Ridge Boys. I mean, there's a lot to do, a lot to learn.
I have heard from many, many people what just a top-notch event this is from start to finish. So I'm excited about going. I've never really gone in the past because even when I had my trucks, my operation, I was leased to a carrier. So, NASTIC services I just didn't need them, but I've always watched them. They're kind of like, I almost think of NASTIC as like the submerged whale. They're way bigger than most people think. They're not all that visible in the industry, really. I do a lot in the industry, and they're just kind of off doing their own thing, and they don't make a lot of noise. But the more you look at that organization, the more you realize it is really, really well run and bigger than most people think.
Oh, absolutely. Well, every association has something it takes, brings to the table that is one of the real benefits. And in NASTIC's case, it is their fuel program, which they're one of the largest buyers of diesel fuel in the United States.
Isn't that insane? When that's how NASTIC kind of crossed my radar in the beginning, it was my callers who would call and talk about this fuel card. And this goes way, way back. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. How does this little organization have this amazing fuel card? These are better discounts than I see from some of the biggest carriers in the country, that have fuel cards for their owner operators. I'm like, how did they do this? Well, then the more I researched them, the more I realized they were bigger than I thought they were. And then when I did, David and I have only crossed paths a couple times over the last couple of decades being in the industry. When I realized and got to talk to David, and him and his partner both came from the fuel card business. That was their background. And they just really worked at this and just became a monster in the fuel card industry.
Absolutely. I have friends who, during their trucking careers actually had the fuel card. And, similar to you, I was always leased to an overlying carrier and never had my own operating authority. And it's kind of funny. I heard a bit of your previous caller. I too, like you, have always heard that if you're leased to a carrier, you're not really a business, right?
Right.
And, I was doing $250,000 a year 20 years ago, leased to a motor carrier.
Exactly. When I'm paying those taxes and I'm filing employment, tax records, it certainly feels like a business to me. So whatever anybody else might think about that. And then it was kind of nice when I was done with my non-business, I was able to sell it to somebody else. How funny. I've never been able to sell a job to anybody before.
Right. But, speaking of the fuel card, though, I had friends who were on it, and that's what really opened my eyes up to, there's a lot of fuel cards out there that tell you they give you 10, 20, 30 cents a gallon, right? That's nothing. That's nothing compared to what exists in the system if you get into a cost plus program, and that's essentially what their program is the cost plus. I mean, my friends would actually show me, what they were effectively paying. Say the pump price at a particular petro, for the sake of example, was $4 a gallon, depending on where the market was. I've seen them have discounts of over $1 a gallon.
Which sounds insane. The first time I heard that, I thought, oh, come on. There's just no way. And yet they showed it to me because they get all that pricing and they have the app. And I'm like, that was what got my attention. And this was a long time ago, because the number one cost we focus on my show, we've been doing it forever, is fuel, because it's the biggest cost for an owner-operator, and it's the one they have the most control over. So we focus on both sides of that equation. One, making sure the truck gets the best fuel economy possible, but two, that we're buying our fuel correctly. And NASTC in their app really helps you do both if you understand, pre-tax cost and post-tax cost, knowing how to buy your fuel based on the fuel tax, and then getting the discount. There is a savings for one truck of about $4,000 to $5,000 a year by using that discount card and buying in the right place. That's a big number.
Totally agree with you. And, just as a sidebar to that type of conversation, something that I'm seeing, because we do IFTA reporting for our California members. And as you're probably aware of, most of your listeners are, if they run California in particular, you get next to Oregon, who has that obnoxious ton-mile tax, and we can leave that one alone. That lives in a different world by itself. A lot of people may not be aware that California's diesel fuel tax, October 1st, is going to effectively $1.09 per gallon.
That is insane.
Right now it's at it is at 89 cents. And like you do, I'm always telling our members to shop that net price. You got to discount the state fuel tax you pay, and then find out if you're, especially, in our case, we have a lot of California-based carriers, and they run the 12 Western, maybe border states. And many of them are actually making a huge error in over-purchasing out of state.
I try to explain this so people can understand it, but this fuel tax thing, it's one of those topics that every time it came up on the air and I would try to explain it to somebody, I would end up feeling like I confused them more than anything else. And I don't know why. So I actually went and created a course it's an online course people can take, so I can show them the numbers. I can show them a fuel tax report. I can show them what happens at the end of the quarter. And the one thing I try to get across to people is we always should be buying net tax. You got to get the tax out of the equation, because when you pull up to the pump, it's like buying two totally different things, but trying to compare the price to something else. You can't do it. When you pull up to a pump, you are paying for fuel and you're paying for fuel tax, but that tax is different in every state you run in. So you have to take that out of there. But in general, there are some general statements we can make. In general, states with higher fuel taxes are forced to discount their fuel more to remain competitive, or nobody would buy fuel in their state. So many times, the states with higher fuel taxes are actually better bargains. Pennsylvania's like 70 some cents. California's 80 something right now, isn't it? 84
89
okay.
Right, for this quarter.
And going up to $1.09. But you have to watch every time you go to buy fuel. California could be in the running. That might, because you're going to get credit for every penny you pay in tax anyway.
Right. One of the things I've noticed, and in my trucking days, it was, there wasn't the disparity, obviously, in fuel taxes. They were, obviously not similar, but close enough. But you still would shop exactly as you described. I would still shop based on that net price, with one exception: never buy Oregon fuel. There's virtually never a time where that's a good purchase. I know you were in Oregon.
I know, and I won't say that because it is still a math issue. It is still Oregon's pump price minus the fuel tax, which is zero. So it's easy to compare Oregon.
Right.
But there are times where, and you can't change your ton mile tax. You still got to pay that. And then, we have states that have both. We still have New Mexico, New York, Kentucky, that have both a fuel tax. Connecticut that have both a fuel tax and a ton mile tax. Yep. In my opinion, since we're talking about this, we should be thinking nationally about moving to a straight ton mile tax like Oregon, because it takes away all the alternative fuel issues. We have electric vehicles coming online. We have hydrogen coming online. We have natural gas. We've got alternative fuels that aren't being taxed right now for road tax. And how do you, as an industry, how do you say this? Oh, look at the cost of hydrogen electric, which we still don't even know the cost. But once we do, you're not going to be able to point to it and say, look, it's so much better. No, at some point that fuel is going to be taxed. So why don't we just start moving towards a tax that is just generic across all fuel types?
Electronic, the specter of what's coming in trucking is going to, in my opinion, be something where it's electronic tracking. You already have the ELDs, and unless you go through an audit, can people underreport their miles? Absolutely, right? Because it's kind of a honesty-based system. But just real quick on the Oregon, the reason I said what I did, Kevin, is that I always used to find that those fuel stops on the Washington side of I-5,
right.
they weren't big fuel stops. They because they wanted to compete with Oregon, you were 10, 15 cents more a gallon, but I was getting 30 cent juice. I was actually netting better over purchasing Washington.
You are correct. And there have been other examples historically around the country. When I ran my trucks, I had trucks that only ran Florida and Georgia. I had out and back line haul runs every day. And that was one of those examples. Back then, Georgia was like 6 cents a gallon for fuel tax. And if I remember right, Florida was probably 30, maybe even 40 cents. I can't remember now, but there's a huge disparity. So like you said, right there, the closer you got to the state line, the more the Florida truck stops had to discount their fuel to be competitive, and the more Georgia could crank their price of the fuel up and still manage to sell to people because they didn't understand. And then you also have the company drivers in fleets that don't try to manage this at all. They just tell their driver, just fuel up wherever, it'll all work out in the wash. And because of that, if you understand that disparity and know where that happens at state lines, you can get some real bargains on fuel. Like you said, Washington became a bargain because they had to discount that price so much.
Yep, I did the same thing when I ran Miami. It was always, fueling in Florida right before the state line.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing to me. We have been dealing with this. You probably know this because you deal with a lot of this stuff. I can never remember, when did we get IFTA? Because I've worked under both systems, so I know it changed since I own trucks, but I can never remember when. Early 90s?
Yeah. Boy, it's funny. Over the decades, I kind of forget when. Because I can still remember having the bingo cards. I got pictures of my old trucks. 7 license plates on the front, fuel decals up the wazoo on the sides, and it was at a point, I believe, sometime in the 90s that an agreement was struck amongst the states and the provinces in Canada, to have this uniform system. It's interesting. Oregon's in it, but they don't have a tax.
Right. Right. But you and I both remember filling out a fuel tax report for every state you operated your trucks in. What a pain that was. And there were states that just didn't give you refunds. If you overbought in a state, too bad. They kept that extra tax. And then when you underbought in another state, and if you overbought in one, you had to underbuy in another, then you had to pay them their extra tax. So the strategy back then, and it made sense, was try to buy enough fuel in each state to cover your miles. Try to stay as close as possible. And that made sense until the day they turned IFTA on. And that practice should have ended. And yet I still hear people say this once in a while.
It's actually, you master the system, and I don't know what your experience was, but I can tell you that running primarily Wisconsin in my trucking days to the West Coast, I had mastered it enough that every quarter I was always getting a refund. It may not have been much, but I was getting a refund, my IFTA taxes.
A lot of times when you're buying fuel right, that's exactly what happens, because I mentioned that states with higher fuel taxes have to discount their fuel more. So if you're buying properly, you tend, it's not always true, but you tend to buy more fuel in high tax states, which leads to a refund at the end of the quarter. And I always try to tell people the refund is not the goal. Because the refund is, we're just getting our money back. It's kind of like income taxes. I don't really want a refund on my income taxes. But in fuel tax, it just happens because if you're buying properly, it's likely to occur. But that's not our goal. Some people hear me say that and think it's the goal to get the refund. No, it's just what happens when you buy your fuel right.
I always say this, Kevin, a lot of younger people, they don't want to hear about, from older guys, boy, I remember when diesel was, 60, 70, 80 cents a gallon kind of stuff,
Yeah.
But one of the things I do here is, why is diesel, in my, 80s, maybe by the early 90s, because I forget when the federal law changed. Some of the cheapest diesel fuel in the country was in California when I was trucking out there. And what a lot of people don't know or remember is that up until that time, there was a prohibition on selling Alaska oil anywhere except outside the United States, which meant that all that oil hit the West Coast markets, and California has a closed system. There are no pipelines from the East and the Gulf Coast to California for refined product. It ends in Phoenix. And so that marketplace was flooded with Alaska oil. And of course, California at that time was the number 3 producer, 2
Wow.
of
Yeah.
oil in the United States. It still actually has. It was interesting. I was looking at it recently. They still have one of the highest petroleum reserves in the ground in the country, except they've taken a lot of the Pacific Ocean blocks out. Used to be nothing but oil getting pumped off in the Santa Barbara Channel. And, that's diminished over the years from all the environmentalists.
Things have certainly changed. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So, I like talking about the old days, not just to reminisce. We can learn things from it, and we're in a strange industry because when you look at fuel costs, they are so volatile. They go from crazy highs up in the $4 and $5 range when things go wrong, and then we drop back down to $2 a gallon again, or low twos. And when fuel prices are down where they were for a while, it really is a huge bargain. When you go back and look what they should be based on what we were paying when we talk about those days of 60, 70, 80 cents. But that was a long time ago. $2 fuel at low twos is still a bargain, if you look at inflation and what it should be. But it's just such a volatile cost. And then we can get into the next big issue I always struggle describing to people, which is the fuel surcharge and why we have it and why you might not see it on a load. And that, I have owner operators screaming, "Oh my God, the broker must have stole my fuel surcharge. There's none in this load." No, there won't be on a brokered load more than likely. We only really need fuel surcharges on contract freight. And it's so hard to get people to understand that. But I try to also explain to them, even though the fuel surcharge is only stated on a contract rate, it affects every rate we have. The fuel price today affects the line haul rate. The reason we don't need a fuel surcharge is because I'm negotiating the load today and I know what my fuel cost is today. So why would I complicate it with the fuel surcharge? I'll just say, here's my rate today, and it is based on the fuel cost.
What's interesting about that is myself and another friend, we were at the time leased to a motor carrier, and it was back in I forget what point in the 90s, and we went into management, and we actually negotiated a fuel surcharge. At that time, we were on a mileage rate, is what we were getting paid to run the West Coast. Right. And we did negotiate that very traditional, as a lot of people know, the nickel increase for, what the heck was it, a penny increase per mile for every nickel increase in the price of fuel back then, with a baseline of 130. And what's interesting over the years, and as I was towards the end of my actual driving career, is I'd asked a salesman with a company, why haven't you just put this over into the rate as opposed to just continuing to assess a fuel surcharge? And I was told it's because the shippers were comfortable with that, and they always felt they were going to get hosed by putting it in the rate, as opposed to paying that variable on, a fuel surcharge. And I never quite got that. I thought, but
it protects both parties. If we're trying to negotiate a contract rate for a year, and on the day we're negotiating it, fuel is $5 a gallon, well, as the carrier, I'd love to put that into my rate and know I'm going to get that the whole year, because the odds of fuel going up beyond that are probably slim, but the chances of it coming down are excellent. If it comes down, I win, the shipper loses. So the fuel surcharge is really there to protect both parties.
Yeah, it frankly, at the time, it was a godsend, especially when we were at that time on a mileage contract. Yeah. We didn't. It was either you got it or you're going to have to find a new home.
Yeah, well, what I remember about this, and you're right, it was somewhere around the early 90s, and we were paying like 80-some cents a gallon for fuel. That had been the norm for a long time. And I can't remember what year it was, but it was the year I almost went out of business, because several things happened to me all in the same year. And one of them was fuel went to like $1.40 a gallon over a month. And
Oh,
The fuel surcharge took a long time before we actually started talking about a fuel surcharge and then paying it. So in the beginning, it was just like a pure expense. We just got hammered for a while there.
yeah, it's. I still remember the night. I was actually, for whatever reason, had taken a load out to New York City out of Minneapolis, and I was going through Stroudsburg, PA, and I called a buddy of mine. We, early days of cell phones. He says, "My God, the price out on the sign's $2 a gallon." It was just outrageous.
I know. We were hurting, and nobody even knew what a fuel surcharge was yet. Like you said, that $1.30 base or a $1.25 base got thrown in there, but we hadn't really needed a fuel surcharge prior to that. And it was really rough. And I dropped a couple engines I wasn't expecting. The base plate price in Ohio went up, and I had 11 trucks. And man, I was hurting that year. That was a rough year.
Yeah. Oh, it caused other changes in my behavior. I always had, personally, my personal vehicles were, SUVs. I remember having a Ford Explorer when gasoline hit $1.50 a gallon. I'd never seen that, and I had a Ford Explorer 14 miles a gallon on a good day. And it's been 23 years. I reverted back to my teenage years. My first cars were, Volkswagen Bugs. That always would get you the girls.
That's right.
Or everyone else was buying Camaros, or whatever.
Yeah.
Anyhow, I went back to Farfignugens, and I still drive a Volkswagen to this day, and 42, 43 on the highway, and I just, it's always been a focus of mine. I am amazed when I see people pull up to the pump. My brother has one of those Duramax diesels, and
man,
boy, he just complains when he gets to the pump. It's like, it cost me $100 and some, and I'm like, yeah, and you're just driving it to the airport and leaving it at the airport. Get yourself something else.
Yeah. Well, you'll appreciate this. The only thing my father ever did was drive a truck. He started driving a milk truck when he was 14, obviously without a license. It's all he ever did. He was an owner-operator on and off his whole life. He always wanted a Mercedes diesel. We would go I went and looked at so many of those cars when I was a kid. My dad would just never spend that kind of money. He would go look at them. He never pulled the trigger, never bought one. But what he did buy was the Volkswagen Rabbit diesel when it came out in 1979 or 80, somewhere around there. That thing got like 52 miles to the gallon on the highway. What an incredible car that was way back then. The crazy thing was I owned a smart car for a little while for a specific reason, and that thing only did like 44. So the fact that we had 52 miles to the gallon, but it's because it was a diesel, and then all of our emission regulations just kind of killed diesel cars in this country.
Yeah, well, kind of funny side story to that. I needed to buy a new car in 2018 and that was right at the time of the Volkswagen emission scandal.
Oh yeah.
And I went into the Volkswagen dealership in Ontario, California, and brand spanking new, sitting on the showroom floor, shiny, was a nice 4-door Passat. And of course, I've gotten old. I like a sedan,
Yeah.
And $17,000 out the door, brand new.
Wow.
And it was because Volkswagen couldn't sell anything because of the emissions scandal. And and it's so ironic that number one, they quit building that particular platform, but you look at the Kelley Blue Book on it, and it just blows my mind that it's still worth almost what I paid for it, which that's happened to a lot of cars and trucks. Everybody knows what happened during the COVID, 500,000-mile trucks selling for more than they cost brand new. It's just
stupid prices. I can remember taking calls, and I've taken calls like this for, the 20 plus years I've been on the air, somebody call me and say, I sold my truck, I traded my truck in, what's going to happen on taxes? And people used to ask all the time, am I going to have a capital gain? And I'd be like, listen, I've done thousands of tax returns. I've never reported a capital gain on the sale of a truck ever, because nobody ever sells one of these trucks for more than what they paid for it. And that's what you would have in order to have a capital gain. I would try to explain to them what you're going to pay is a recapture of depreciation. That's different. You could have a huge loss on this truck. You paid $100,000 for it. You sell it for $10,000 and you still owe tax. But that's recapture of depreciation. But in that year, I had to start telling people, when you file your tax return, you're going to have recapture of depreciation, just like you always have. You're also going to have a capital gain. First time I've ever seen this, because people were selling their trucks for more than what they paid for them. That was unheard of.
It's interesting what you said, because when I went to work on the association side in 2006, I had my 97 Pete that I sold, and I still remember. I sold it for $23,000 with 1.3 million miles on it. But the year before, I just bought a brand new utility reefer,
right.
53-footer, stainless, all nice. But anyhow, I used what I've always referred to as trucker crack. And when I call it trucker crack, it's called accelerated depreciation.
Exactly. Right.
You get hooked on that, and it's really tough to get off of it, because you can destroy yourself tax-wise. And very, very few people talk about that. I had to go through exactly what you talked about. I had taken accelerated. I totally expensed out that trailer in 2005 on my taxes. And I went through that. I ended up living in Wisconsin. And then, of course, moving out of state, there was another issue, the exit tax penalty that states will charge you when you leave. They take away some of your allowable expenses on your taxes. Some states do. But I ended up with a $50,000 state and federal tax bill that year.
It catches up to you.
Off.
Yes, it catches up to you. What used to make me crazy, I would get a call from somebody who wanted to talk to me about my accounting and tax services. They weren't a client, and we would just go over their operation. And it would always come up. I would look through their history, and I'd be like, why are you buying a new truck every 3 years? And the answer almost always was, my accountant told me I should. And I'd be like, well, look, your accountant has one thing in mind, and that's making you happy with your tax return this year. That's always their goal. I do a lot of tax returns. I hate telling people you have a big tax bill, but it's just part of being in business. But instead, these accountants, tax preparers would tell these guys to go buy new trucks. And I'd say, look, they're only doing that because it will lower your tax bill for a while. But is having a low tax bill anywhere on the list of why you got into business? If we go back and think about why you started a business, did you ever write down on your goal list, I want to pay less tax? Because if you did and then you started a business, you're insane, because you'll never pay less tax owning a business. You're always going to pay more, but you have to understand that tax preparer has one goal, and that's just to get your tax as low as possible. I'm trying to help you have a goal of running a more profitable business. And if that's the case, you keep trucks to $1 million plus, take good care of them, spec them right, maintain them. That's how you make more money in this business. But now I would get them right at that point where it had finally caught up to them. You can do this a couple of times, then it catches up to you and you are screwed now, because now you still have an expensive truck and your tax bill is now going through the roof and there's nothing you can do to change it.
That's exactly right. You end up making big truck payments without that the IRS considers to be ordinary income.
Yeah. Yeah.
At the ripe old age of being in my mid-60s now, I will say this. I mean, I paid a lot in taxes. I always knew. I used to have guys rib me all the time. I paid nothing.
But,
well, you go back, before the advent of computers, I saw the guys reaching across the fuel counter and grabbing paper receipts, and they would fill them all out and zero everything out. And guess what they bitch about now? Geez, Joe, I'm not getting nothing in Social Security. I'm like, yeah, because you cheated the system.
So I love this because this was a big topic for me too. As soon as somebody said, well, I have the best accountant ever, I don't pay any tax. Well, stop there, because I don't care who your accountant is. All of the rules are written. I've read them. I know there's a lot of it, but I've read the tax code. I have to. I understand the tax code. You don't have a genius tax preparer. There are no real loopholes. Everything's written. I mean, anybody who takes the time to study taxes should understand how to keep somebody's tax low. But here's the thing I will tell people. There's only two ways to pay zero. Either don't make any profit or cheat. Those are the only two ways. And the not making any profit just is not on my radar anywhere. I want to make as much profit as I possibly can. And then you're going to pay tax. You just have to realize that. That used to make me crazy. Oh, I have the best accountant ever. No, you don't. He doesn't know anything more than any of the rest of us doing tax returns. Anybody who wants to go read the tax code can figure it out. Yes, it's complicated. Yes, it's the IRS, but there are no secrets. It's all written.
Yeah, it's so funny. We're even talking like this. I used the same tax lady for 20 years, and looking back, I'm like, wow, what a mistake it was, because exactly what you said. The objective was, well, let's get your tax bill as low as it can. Yet, would burn up that depreciation, and yet. Is something you're saying. I always made money. I mean, I had some lean years, don't get me wrong.
Right.
But I always made really good money. I mean, there was a reason I left a Teamster's job in 85 and bought my own truck.
Yeah.
And it was because I made a lot more money. And along with that, did go, paying a pretty good tax bill. And, it's just, it was just, I was never I was always fearful because I owned other assets, a home, et cetera,
right.
And I wasn't going to play these games I saw others playing, because if I went through an IRS audit, I'd have, lost everything.
Yeah.
And you do read where you see that happening to people, to think that the IRS doesn't, they have profiles. My wife worked at H&R Block at the headquarters building in Kansas City. And I learned a lot about the profiles they've set up for determining audits.
Yeah, and unfortunately, they go after the low end a lot because it's easy. It's easy to find an owner-operator cheating. It's not hard at all. The way these guys did it was so ridiculous. It would have taken a junior IRS agent about 15 minutes to figure out what they were cheating on, whereas the bigger a business gets, the more sophisticated its tax strategies become, and the harder it is to find them doing something wrong. So the IRS is basically, they just go after the low-hanging fruit, which are small businesses that don't have, accounting firms and high-priced accountants figuring this stuff out. So what else this whole depreciation thing reminds me of? A lot of these new bank accounts now, these internet bank accounts like Chime, and there's a bunch of them out there, and they make a big deal about the fact that you can now get your direct deposit 2 days early. Well, so what? It only helps you one time. What do people not understand about this? Why does this sound like such a great thing? You normally get paid on Friday. Well, this week you want to get paid on Wednesday, and you can because of whatever. You can get your direct deposit early. But now what happens? Now you have to wait till next Wednesday again. Well, guess what? That's the same 7 days you used to wait before. So how did this help?
Well, I will tell you that I do know some people that use those I don't even consider them banks myself, and I'm sure there's people out there listening who do, but I do know a few people that utilize those types of financial institutions, and I'll tell you, I know the reason why they use them. It's because they got an IRS tax lien against them that's pretty significant, and they're trying to move money around quickly before the IRS grabs it.
Got it. So now that makes sense, but the commercials always make a big deal about this early pay. And I just wonder, does anybody think this through? That I don't know. They make a benefit out of it because I guess it works. But if anybody would stop to think about it, there's no benefit there. You get paid 2 days early one time, and then what? So what?
Yeah. Oh, and I'm sure there's a little fee, kind of like factoring.
Oh, of course, right.
Factoring some that may have been factored already, right?
Yeah. All right, Joe, you and I could reminisce about all this owner-operator stuff all day long. Let's talk a little bit more about the conference. Like I said, I've never been there. You've been a speaker for 11 years now. Didn't you get some award from NASTIC?
Yeah, it was 2014, 15. NASTIC always picks their transportation person of the year. And, I was at the conference and, the dinner and they shocked me. And, usually I'm not, short on words. And I was so shocked, they announced that they were bestowing that honor on me. And I could still remember getting up there on the podium, and it's something I still regret to this day. I'm like, I came across like a moron, I'm sure, because I wasn't prepared. But yeah, they gave me that honor.
That's a big deal. Congratulations for that. That's a big deal. So I'm looking forward to this event, and I'm encouraging. I'm trying to create almost a coup in the background here. I'm trying to get our tribe to kind of take over this event since it'll be our first year there.
Well, I think last year they had 700 attendees, something like that.
Wow.
And it just grows every year. And there's a lot of different breakout sessions that they have, and of course, mine is focused on West Coast issues. And as much as people generally do hate California for a lot of valid reasons, the fact of the matter is a lot of people still truck out there. They don't really have a choice just because of the size of the economy. Most of the nation's fresh produce comes out of there. The ports, I could go on and on.
Right.
But there are issues, as you well know, and your listeners are aware of, that have migrated out of California and will affect trucking nationally if they're not defeated. And, my session will focus, Kevin, on both the coming CARB rules. There is litigation, AB5. There is something anybody who runs California. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that we should probably just start talking about those topics now, because that's a big part of what's going on. I kind of have a funny story about AB5 happened last week. I've been on top of AB5 right from the beginning. I've been against it right from the beginning. Horrible idea. Then they started giving out all their exemptions, and what a mess the whole thing is. You know the whole history. I've talked about it from day one. I've really tried to stay on top of it the best I can. It's a fairly complicated issue. It's, made it to the Supreme Court, wasn't heard. So there's always a lot going on. And in the last couple of months, I've kind of taken a hiatus from being a news junkie. It was really starting to stress me out a lot. I always use the excuse, I read all this news and I watch politics because I have to. I have to be informed. I've got to let my listeners know what's going on. But I got to the point where it's really affecting me stress-wise because the news sucks lately, I mean, none of it's good. So most of it's just absolutely awful, things I never thought I would see. So I took a little break. I tried to stay on top of the big issues, but for the most part, I backed way off reading and watching a lot of news. So last week, I'm doing a Twitter space, and we were all over the board, and we talked about AB5 some. And then towards the end, I had somebody came in and asked me the question. They said, can you explain AB5? And when you do this as long as I have, you kind of notice things. And the way he asked the question, I thought, this isn't just a question. I almost felt like I was being set up. I could kind of tell. So I thought, all right, I'll explain. So I explained AB5 the way I always do. And I got done and I said, so does that help? And he immediately jumped on it. Yeah, it helps, except the article I just posted proves you're completely wrong. I'm like, oh boy, here we go. All right. I said, so how am I wrong? And he said, well, read the article. And I said, well, I don't have time right this minute. Maybe you could just summarize it for me and tell me how I'm wrong. Well, trucking got an exemption. And I said, no, they didn't. Yes, they did. Trucking got an exemption. And I went at him. I'm like, look, I've spoken with some of the attorneys that handle this case, that are working on this case. I've followed this case for years. I'm not wrong. And I mean, I pushed back hard. And then I got off the air and I thought, what if something changed? I haven't been watching the news. This could have changed. I thought maybe I should have, toned that answer down a little bit because I said I'm 100% sure I'm right. And so I got off the air and I went to look at his article, and sure enough, the article says trucking has an exemption. And it was just like a week or so ago the article came out, I thought, because it had a July date on it. So I actually apologized. I actually wrote a post and I said, look, I apologize. I haven't been keeping up with this for a month or two and something must have changed. And then within 30 seconds, somebody said, did you bother looking at the date on the article? And I hadn't. It was from 2020. So then I had to go back and retract my apology.
There is an exemption within, and it's actually a different, everybody just euphemistically calls it AB5 because that's when it started out. There was a cleanup bill, I forget the number, that superseded it. But there is an exemption in there for trucking, and it's being highlighted in the CTA lawsuit. And the part that's interesting is we litigated on that exemption that's in there, and it's specifically for construction trucking only in California. But it means there's no brokers involved, and the contractors have to essentially dispatch the owner-operators. Nobody does that. Multi-billion-dollar corporations are not getting involved in that.
Right.
And our lawyers looked at the whole thing. We actually went to court on it, and we got an agreement from the state of California that they will never enforce that provision. And, that's old legal stuff, but at any rate, it's completely worthless, but it's being utilized in the current litigation as an example of a carve-out that's given to all these various industries. We'll see where that goes with the court, because there is going to be a trial on AB5, and it's interesting in watching what's happening. My view on the legal tactics being used right now is that it's going to throw in-state trucking under the bus, but interstate trucking probably has a pretty good legal argument.
Oh, good.
In the ongoing case. That's my view. We were the first to litigate on that, and what happened, Kevin, is we had already gotten an adverse decision from the federal bench in Sacramento, and we were in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And the CTA had filed their competing case, and the federal judge in San Diego put that case on hold pending the outcome of our case. And we had a meeting of the minds with the leadership of both associations, and we agreed to drop our case so theirs could proceed. It was essentially giving trucking two bites at the apple. That's what happened. Doesn't get a lot of publicity, but at any rate, that's exactly what happened. And as far as the Supreme Court not agreeing to hear the case, I'm not even concerned about that at all. That didn't surprise me.
Right.
The case has never gone to trial. It's never gone to trial. The Supreme Court doesn't like to hear cases related to, and this was solely related to the injunction that Judge Benitez put in place there in San Diego. And I was in the courtroom when he heard the case, and that guy is so spot on in his analysis
good.
of what AB5 is. He is absolutely spot on. So there's going to be a trial in San Diego. Boy, there's a lot of motions been going back and forth. Teamsters are in there trying to, they're so good at saving jobs, like Yellow, they're in there trying to, I got to take my shot, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, they're in there trying to defend this. And, the problem is the B prong is impossible, not just for traditional motor carriers who lease owner operators to pass that B prong. You can't contract with somebody engaged in the same business. That's almost all you need to know, because you have to pass all three prongs of an ABC. You cannot pass B. But the other thing is trucking companies themselves contract with owner operators with their own authority. Guess what? That's not permitted under the B prong.
Wait.
So it's way beyond just an effect. And I've listened to.
Wait a minute. I want to make sure I heard that right. So a carrier, how about a carrier with broker authority?
They're still a motor carrier. If they are a motor carrier, and you see this with a lot of carriers, and we won't touch that because it makes them uninsurable. They don't know that. But you see a lot of carriers, motor carriers, that have broker authority. Now, within the state of California, all the motor carriers broker, but there's no state law governing brokerage. So there's no requirement to have anything. No motor carrier permit, no DOT number. It's not regulated, is the point. And so motor carriers broker.
Now you're talking intrastate, or are they doing it
intrastate? Intrastate. It is the largest intrastate market in the United States, bigger than Texas.
Yeah, I didn't realize that
in terms of fleets,
that was all unregulated within California.
Yeah, there's no regulation on brokers within the state of California. Alabama, for instance, requires even just brokers within the state to get a license to do that. California has zero requirements. So, it's really, interesting for me to watch the developments at this point and how it's legally being argued, because federal arguments, interstate commerce, for instance, they're valid for interstate motor carriers. Those are not saving arguments for the huge population of in-state fleets.
Yeah, that's a good point. We don't deal with the in-state stuff much, so I didn't realize some of those things. Let me ask you another question. This is it's not totally off topic, but it's something I've been thinking about, and I don't know if I have a mental block around this or whatever, but whenever I bring this up, I don't seem to get any really good answers. So if I want to go into business, almost any business, for the most part, I've started many, many businesses without doing anything. Like no local license, you get a tax ID or some of the stuff you absolutely have to have, but no business license, even though the county I live in probably required it. I remember one of my businesses, it was in Orlando, and I had a physical location, and a tax guy came around one time and he's like, "Where's your tax license?" And I said, "I don't know. I don't have one." And he said, "Well, you have to have one." And I said, "Well, I don't." And he said, "Okay, well, you got to go get one then." And I said, "All right, where?" And he told me, and I went and got one. It's probably the only business license I've ever had. So I can just start a business and go into business and, file my taxes, and nobody's ever bothered me. I've been doing this for 40-some years. Why is it that once we deregulated the trucking industry, why did the authority part stick? Why do we still have to ask the federal government for permission to be in business? I don't understand why we still have that process. I understood why it existed prior to deregulation. That was the whole point. The government controlled the rates by controlling the supply, by controlling who had authority and where they had authority. It was heavily regulated right down to the lane. But once that went away, and there is no federal control of rates anymore. Nobody's trying to control the size of the number of trucking companies. Why did this whole ugly process of needing authority continue?
It's actually, there is a answer for your question.
Good.
And it is Congress. And, a lot of this falls under the guise of safety, highway safety, and access to the marketplace. Even in 95 with the ICC Termination Act, that is what killed one of the most powerful regulators in the United States. And at that time, it was the Texas Railroad Commission. They totally, just like California did through its PUC, some will still remember Cal-T numbers. California and Texas severely restricted access to their intrastate markets. Congress prohibited that. But they, under the safety exceptions, they still allowed them to regulate entry into the marketplace. Texas and California have almost identical systems in terms of permitting in-state motor carriers. Half the states in the country still require motor carrier authority just to operate within the state.
I can remember when I was in Ohio, Ohio had really strict lockdowns of who could move intrastate, and if you had some of that authority, it was valuable. Like it was kind of like prior to deregulation nationally, your authority was one of your most valuable assets, and for a long time after deregulation, Ohio was still that way. You just couldn't get authority to move freight intrastate, and it kept the rates really high.
It's interesting. I do know some people are dead from Ohio PUC, and when they were forced out of the business of regulating motor carrier access to the marketplace, they became one of the lead safety agency for Ohio in terms of motor carrier safety oversight.
I always hear the safety aspect. Okay, I get that, but we have lots and lots of very dangerous industries where you could hurt people, and yet you still don't have to ask for the federal government for permission to be in business. I get it. We can have all kinds of safety regulations, and we do. I still don't understand why they have to be tied to this thing we call authority. And it changes everything. If I have authority, I can go directly to a customer or a broker and get freight. If I don't have authority, I can't. That just seems odd to me.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, but in the end, it's Congress of the U.S. setting these things in motion. It was
if that's the answer, then that makes total sense. It's just politics. There's no good logical or common sense reason to do this. It's just politics. That answer makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the only thing they deregulated in 1980, I always use kind of an interesting example to describe, my generation that, I did start driving a truck in 1977, pre-deregulation.
Right.
I was in college driving a beer truck. Imagine that, yoo-hoo. and, but I was only allowed at that time to operate within Wisconsin. You had to go from Milwaukee to La Crosse, Eau Claire, et cetera. But if I crossed the Mississippi River Bridge, I became unsafe. So there's my shot at that,
One of my other favorite topics that people usually disagree with me on is allowing 18-year-old drivers. And one of my I'm actually for it. One of my arguments is, how do we think it's okay to allow an 18-year-old to drive all over Texas, all he wants, but the minute he crosses the Red River, he somehow becomes unsafe? How does that make any sense?
Yeah, Well, you get cities that straddle borders,
Right.
St. Louis,
Yeah.
Kansas City, or literally in Kansas City, right down the middle of a city street. But you cross the street,
And now you're unsafe.
That's never, yeah, that's never made any sense to me. And I understand that it's very, very controversial amongst truck drivers. And, one of the things I get a kick out of is when I hear people say, well, Joe, it was different back when we were young. We were so much more mature. And I go, let me describe exactly what it was like hauling out of Milwaukee's breweries in the 70s. And this was the same at almost all breweries nationally. I'm 18 years old. I'm going into Schlitz, Miller, Pabst, Val Blatz had just closed down. That's who I was hauling beer out of.
Right.
Every last one of the breweries had drivers' rooms where we sat sometimes for a day or more waiting. It depends on what type of beer. If you're picking up kegs, you were always screwed.
Yeah.
But the drivers' rooms were full of coolers of every beer that brewery made. You think at 18 years old I wasn't sitting there? Well, I was sitting there. There's a phrase. We used to go to the brewery to get loaded, and we got loaded.
Exactly.
And then we got loaded.
Yeah.
And that was the world that existed. So when I hear this phrase, and by the way, it wasn't just me at 18. It was all the truck drivers were drinking beer.
I was just telling the story the other day. I grew up in a trucking family. My grandfather was an owner-operator. My father, all my brothers, my brother-in-laws, my uncle. I mean, everybody drove a truck. Most of my time growing up, my father and most of my brothers worked for union companies. My dad worked for every LTL union company that existed, and it seemed like he was always there when they went out of business, too, because there was a lot of that going on back then. All those, you mentioned all those beer companies that don't exist anymore. There was an awful lot of trucking companies, LTL carriers that don't exist anymore. But this is an absolute true story. I remember this growing up. Out of the Cleveland terminal for Spectre, which is where my dad was working at the time, they had a couple really short runs. Ripley, New York, out of Cleveland was like 3.5 hours or something. I mean, it was a pretty short run. It was not uncommon for those guys to take one of those runs. When they got back, then they had to have 8 hours off, I guess it was back then. They would go to the bar and spend the entire 8 hours at the bar, and dispatch would call them at the bar when they were up for their next dispatch again. And they would go back to work. And that was a fairly common thing. So, I don't want to hear about how much more responsible the earlier generations were.
It's interesting. It's funny you mentioned that. I was a Schneider Transport union driver, 40 years ago, when the entire company was the largest truckload union motor carrier in North America.
Yeah.
And under our union contract, we could not fuel our own trucks. That wasn't our job to fuel the trucks. So all of our fuel stops, Hubbard, Ohio, Green Shingle in Fairview, Pennsylvania.
Oh my God, I remember the Green Shingle. It was my dad's
great food back in the day.
Favorite truck stop. I was going to the Green Shingle when I was like 7 and 8 years old, riding with my dad.
Well, here's something that was happening. Truck World, Hubbard, Ohio, back then. We'd pull up to the pumps. We couldn't fuel. It was all full service. Check the oil, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
We'd go into the bar in there. We'd go into the bar, get a cheeseburger, wash it down with a beer, and go back to work.
Yeah.
Now, I sit there, I go, okay, that's how mature we all were. And what's really interesting is when you try to say we were more mature, I can tell you that the truck fatality rate per 100 million miles, you can look this up, at that time in U.S. history was somewhere between 7 and 8 fatalities per 100 million miles. We have bounced as low as 1.4 in that. We've stayed down, still above 1, but it was 6 times the fatality rate that exists today.
Well, it's no wonder. We were drinking beer at our break and we didn't have front brakes. Right?
Yeah.
It was a dangerous job.
Yeah. I have a vision of hell. Everybody probably has their own vision of hell. I can tell you exactly what my vision of hell is. It is to spend eternity in a cab over TransStar that's 138-inch wheelbase with a 45-foot trailer attached, and everything is on spring ride. And I start on I-80 at the Ohio-Pennsylvania line. I get to the Delaware Water Gap, and I got to turn around and go back across that bumpy slope. And the air ride seats only came halfway up to your back. And I realize we're kind of sounding,
I know.
It's war storying it,
We've earned it.
But that's my vision of hell.
Yeah, we've earned it. I only have a slight variation to that because I grew up in Streetsboro, Ohio, exit 13 on the Ohio Turnpike back then. So Ohio and east to the East Coast was what I did just about every week. So very familiar with that route. The only change is mine was a GMC Astro cab over. Oh man! So spring ride everything, and it was like driving a fishbowl around. There was so much glass. In the wintertime, there was no way you could keep that cab warm, and in the summertime, it was worse than a sauna in there.
That's my first truck I bought in '85. I got a large car, 79 GMC Astro it had originally an 8V92 in it, and then that blew up and it got replaced with a 6V92.
My first truck was an old Roadway, and I had a 6V92 in that. But then when I got the Astro, it did have a big Cam 350 in it, so that was powerful back then.
Oh,
if you had a big,
you had a large car.
Yeah, yeah. Boy. All right, boy. This is I'm really enjoying this, Joe. Anything else we should talk about in California? Certainly AB5 something.
Yeah.
What else should we be watching?
I did mention. Yeah. Coming up the end of this year, something anybody who runs west wants to run west is going to have to know is that there are going to be additional registration requirements. Number one, on power units. Starting in the fourth quarter, sometime late probably in the fourth quarter, there is going to be a requirement to register your truck with the California Air Resources Board, regardless of what state you're in, and pay a $30 per truck registration fee.
Really?
And starting in 2000, yes, and I'll be covering this and more, obviously, at the NASTC conference. But starting in 2000, right now it's scheduled for summer 2024. California is going to require any and all trucks that come to California to be emissions tested. This is what the $30 registration fee is all about. And you're not going to be able to go down to your local dealership very likely and get it done because there are specific testing tools. This will be something probably done by the state lines because then it's automatically uploaded to the CARB website. They are going to do, I still go old school, call it the ECM. ECM downloads related to emissions. So if you got deleted stuff on your truck, forget about it. You get busted. Stay away. The other thing is
begging people not to delete these trucks anymore. There is just no good reason to do this. Don't buy one that's deleted. Don't delete one. There are way too many ways to get caught at this now, and it's just not worth it. And it's not necessary anymore. We really have figured out the emissions on these trucks. We know how to keep them running, right?
It's got a lot better, certainly from the advent of 2010, and that first few years was I just cringe when I hear somebody saying they're buying a used 2013. But
we kind of tell people There was the dirty decades. Stay away from '04 to 14. Those are the years that I'd really rather not mess with. There are a couple trucks, certain models or engines in there we can work with, but I'd rather not. But after 2014, almost every engine out there now, we know how to spec them right. We know some additives that help quite a bit. We're just not seeing those emission problems when you do things right now. So there isn't a need to do it anymore, and the downsides are just way too big.
Yeah, you can read almost every day EPA's U.S. EPA is doing CARB's work nationally, and they have been going after trucking companies, everything. The other thing is California CARB has been installing emissions testing devices at the scales within the state, at the main ports of entry into the state. And they will, if it sniffs out your truck is being a polluter, and of course that's by their definition based on model years, et cetera. It will send you a citation. It'll be you got to get this fixed, and it's called a notice of claim. So it's become even because I've known this, everybody knows this. A lot of folks just ignored California rules and said, I never got bothered. I know that's true.
Right.
And yet that they are, there's always been a joke. CARB's diesel cops, which aren't real cops, by the way, they have no primary police powers in the state of California. That's why there's they always have to get mated with a CHP officer. But at any rate, they're solar powered. The sun goes down, you never see them, right?
Right. Yeah.
But the other rule for those who haul produce, California is mandating, of course, ultimately zero emissions reefers by 2029. But there is a registration requirement coming up beginning December 31st of this year. Same deal again. It's $30 to register. It is going to require the affixing to the reefer unit, specific CARB compliance numbers. Anyhow, these things I'm certain are going to get litigated. All the listeners need to think about is a state like New York thinking they could get away with charging $20 for their hot decal.
Right.
This is the same thing.
Yeah.
Except CARB ignored everything. They ignored everything, and I fully expect once their coffers are loaded with money that there's going to be legal attacks on their attempting to make truckers pay for their compliance crap.
It's just crazy how one state can create so many headaches in an industry.
Yeah, that's being, everybody goes, well, that's California. That doesn't affect me. Oh, contraire, especially, contraire. I mean, even, just bouncing around, even AB5, we opposed Julie Sue's nomination to be labor secretary, but, they still want to clamp down on who can be viewed as an independent contractor in the U.S. I
can't imagine, honestly, if they were ever able to pass something like this federally, what it could do to our economy. You talk about the law of unintended consequences kicking in. All I ever think about on this is trucking. But this is so much bigger than just trucking. Trucking will be a huge impact if it happens. But this is so widespread across so many industries. I can't imagine what might happen. And I don't think anybody can. That's the bigger problem. I don't think we can possibly try to predict all of the consequences of something like that happening.
Well, it's I'm like you. I focus on the trucking side, and I do try, privately over cocktails, I'll talk politics, all day long. But it's tough to divorce this issue from, showing the dramatic differences between political parties. and who their alliances, allegiances are to. And you are absolutely correct. I mean, one of the other things we've been watching real close is the joint employer rule. And by the way, I've heard people go, "Oh, Joe's with a big motor carrier association." Half of our members are one truck motor carrier. We are a small business focused association.
Yes.
You know, and the large motor carriers that are a member of our association, they're only there to keep apprised of what we do.
Can I jump in real quick?
You know,
I don't mean to interrupt you, but
sure.
I love the fact that, and I didn't know this till you just said it, that a very large portion of your members are single truck owner operators. I've tried for years to get more owner operators to join state trucking associations. And my point has always been, when they start talking, well, they're only for the big carriers or they're for their members. Of course they're for their members. That's what associations are there for. Maybe you should be one of their members so you have some say. And if enough owner operators would join these organizations, we would have more say.
I have always been a big believer in being part of an association, and it was very, very simple for me. I can still remember late 80s, probably 88, I picked up a Landline magazine up at the old 76 in Pembroke, New York. And I always have believed that, I feel very strongly about issues, but I knew doggone well that I was too busy running my business. Right. Trying to take care of a family. It wasn't going to be, as strongly as I felt about these issues, it wasn't going to be me that was in any position to do anything. Look, you can write all the letters you want. I mean, I don't discourage people from it, but you will never actually hear me, say, write your Congress member, right?
I really
collectively, yeah, I can tell you what happens. It all goes in a circular file.
Yes.
One of the things that I remember once when I was in D.C. is, a member of Congress had met with, and he actually said to me, he says, "Joe," he says, "why should I listen to what you're saying? Because when you walk out this door, in's going to walk the ATA, all the other competing associations, and they got a different take on an issue, right?"
Right.
He says, "You guys are nothing like agriculture. Agriculture is 100% aligned. Trucking is fractured so
yes,
much."
We are.
And he says, "That's your problem in trucking. Your problem in trucking is that, basically he was saying, you all bicker amongst yourselves." And
yes,
I've never forgotten that.
Yeah, we do.
And I get there's a difference between what a large motor carrier wants and, say, an owner-operator or even a driver.
Oh, yeah. See, there's my issue that down on the small end of this market, we get very, very confused. Company drivers, employee drivers, and single truck owner-operators, everything about their day looks exactly the same, doesn't it? They drive a truck, they sleep in a truck stop, they get some fuel, they go fight traffic, they pick up some freight, they go deliver freight. Their day looks exactly the same, and it couldn't be more different. And I don't understand how we try to advocate for drivers and owner-operators at the same time when they could be on completely opposite ends of this issue.
I can give you a grand example of that many of your listeners are probably aware of, and everybody's going to have a different opinion on it. We actually led the charge on California's meal and rest break issue. And there was a very significant reason for our involvement. And of course, in the end, it led to a positive outcome from our viewpoint. But what I've never understood was how drivers, employee drivers primarily, felt that was a good thing to let states individually set their hours of service rules. I still don't understand that thinking. And, I was like, you're not going to get a bonus here. You're not going to get a bonus. The money that's they will just reconfigure everything, And in fact, that's what's really transpired. It just became more of an accounting issue for any motor carrier that, had employee drivers. And keep in mind, half of our members have one truck, and the majority of the rest are just small fleets, maybe up to 20 trucks. That 97, 98% of the industry. That's what our membership constitutes. Most of the company owners, if they're not still actively driving a truck, they're not far removed from the truck driving career that they had that built what they have today.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely the industry is its own animal, and we certainly see a lot of this. Joe, I know we had you booked for an hour, and I've gone way past time.
That's okay.
I've really enjoyed the conversation. Do you want to take a question or two if we have any? I don't have any right now because we've been talking the whole time, but if I ask, we might have some.
Sure. Absolutely.
All right, let's do that. So if you've got a question for Joe, anything about what's going on the West Coast in trucking, this is the guy to ask. He's been all over this issue for how long now on the West Coast specifically?
Specifically 11th year.
Excellent. So
I've been with Western States Trucking Association for 11 years this past June.
Hey, I was just thinking about something else. I noticed there's a new truck show in California. I don't know how new. I know this is the first time. I think it may have been last year. But I was looking at it this year because I'm going to be on the road right then, and I might be able to squeeze it into my schedule. Do you know much about that one?
Which one are you talking about? There's actually, are you talking about the California Trucking Show in Ontario?
Yes. Yeah, that's the one. November, first week in November. No, October.
October 14th and through 15th.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that's been a very, very much of a growing show. Started out pretty small, and it's in the Ontario Convention Center. So if you're trucking and you're out there that weekend, it's a Saturday and Sunday show. We're actually going to have a booth for our drug testing side of the business there. We're finally coming back to it after the COVID. The COVID kind of killed a lot of things. I mean, in California, we had the most draconian shutdowns in the nation,
Yeah, you did.
But yeah, they have the entire Ontario Convention Center. So if you're, stuck at the truck stops there in Ontario, you're just a short Uber Lyft drive, probably cost you $10, $15 to get on over there. And it's, free entry into it.
You know what caught my attention, and you mentioned this, that it's a growing show, which is unusual. Just about every other truck show I know has been shrinking or disappearing for years. So it was interesting to see one that's getting bigger. So we're actually taking off right around October 10th, I believe, in the coach, heading to Tennessee for NASTC. We're just going to take our time and work our way there in the coach. I hate flying anymore, so I can just jump in the coach and keep doing the show and do our thing. And I looked at it and I thought, if we leave here on the 10th, I could just zip down there, hit that show for the weekend, and then we'll take off from there because I'd rather travel across the South anyway. So maybe we'll see you there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I won't be at it. Okay. We'll have staff there.
I'll stop in and say hi.
But like I say, it's just a short hop and a skip and a jump from the truck stops there in Ontario. But it's interesting. The largest truck show in the country. A lot of people focus on Louisville. You go back just enough years, and it was actually Las Vegas. I used to be a big event that took the entire Las Vegas Convention Center, and I do know kind of what happened in terms of management of it and how it got kind of used to be down in Irvine, and there was some bouncing around with different takeovers of it. But the reality of trade shows, and for what you do, Kevin, this one probably would be a decent fit, at least to check it out,
That's what we're going to do. Yeah.
But but trade shows generally, we have kind of backed away from them because there is such a low return on investment for what you have to spend.
Well, that's what we said.
Yeah.
I used to hit a bunch of shows when I was doing a lot of speaking, and that was fine because I was usually getting paid to be there. But when we tried being vendors at truck shows, what a wake-up call. My God, we would spend a fortune. It would disrupt our company for 2 or 3 weeks. And then you'd look at the end and think, why? Why do we do this? And at some point, it was almost like, and I've talked to other vendors too, it wasn't so much that they wanted to be there. It was more that they were afraid not to be there. It's that impression of,
right.
It's Louisville. If you're in trucking and you're not there, somebody's going to wonder why. Well, we stopped going. I just couldn't justify that kind of cost. There was no return on it whatsoever. And then, like you said, they started disappearing. I have a couple reasons why I think Vegas disappeared. The location was awful, in my opinion, for a truck show. And then their unions there, what a nightmare trying to be a vendor there. I can remember the first year I had such a tiny little setup for my booth that I had it on a rolling cart, like a rolling luggage cart. I could carry everything I needed for the booth. So I pull into the parking lot, first time I'm at the Las Vegas Truck Show as a vendor, and I start walking in the front door with my little roll-around cart, and they stop me. And they said, "You can't come in this way, you're a vendor." And I said, and I could actually see right over the guy's shoulder, I could see my booth. It was right there on the corner. It was like 30 feet away from me. I'm like, my booth's right there. I'm just going to walk right to it. And he says, "No, you can't." And I said, "Why not?" And he said, "You can't bring anything in through this door. You got to go around back." And I'm not exaggerating. By the time I figured out how to get around back in the middle of rush hour in Las Vegas, it was probably 2.5 hours before I got to my booth and got my stuff. And I could have had it done in 10 minutes.
Yeah, the Mordita, you got to pay off. That's been one of the other things that we, I can remember going into the Dallas show and just hauling out of the Omni our display booths and I'm no spring chicken anymore, and I was like, that was a pain, just to avoid going around to the shipping dock,
You wouldn't believe the mistake I made one year at the Dallas Truck Show. We had built our signature glider, and we were going to display it in the show. And we were driving it around the country at the time. I was pulling our show trailer behind it. We were living in it, and we get to Dallas, and I'm like, when the show's over, we got to get out of here. We had another appointment to make it to. So I said, I'm going to get fuel before we go in. So I had dual 150s, I think, on that truck. I topped that thing off and then found out you're not allowed in the building with all that fuel. You have to be almost empty. And I stood out in the parking lot in 110-degree heat in Dallas giving fuel away just to anybody that would come and siphon it out of my tanks.
Rookie mistake. I do remember that. But no, it's I did love Vegas just because I love the venue. When I say the venue, I mean Vegas.
Yeah.
So definitely enjoyed that scene. And getting together with folks afterwards. But it's the big thing is a lot of organizations, companies are just looking at the return on investment, the spiraling costs for attending these shows.
Yeah.
And it just is making it not pencil out. It's that simple.
No, that's exactly right. Everybody from the biggest companies, the OEMs, said to Louisville, look, it just doesn't make sense for us to come and spend all this money every year when we don't even have anything new every year to show.
Right. Well, it was, certainly when the OEMs pulled out of most of the trade shows, that was somewhat of a death knell to the mid-size shows.
Yeah, it really was.
It really was.
All right, Joe, I can't believe it. We're at the top of the hour here. I've really enjoyed talking to you, and I'm really looking forward to meeting you at the conference this year.
Absolutely. I look forward to your keynote address to the assembled masses.
All right. And
so it's a great event.
Your membership, now that I know, has got so many owner-operators, I'm going to continue to encourage more owner-operators to join those associations. We need that.
They, whether it's at the national level or especially at the state level, associations do have a lot more success at the state level, in my opinion. But in California, wow, we got, I'm going to say it's almost like we got the communists in power there.
You ain't kidding.
They're so anti-business.
I know.
They're so anti-business. It's you just shake your head and wonder, who's going to pay for all the free stuff they want to give away, at the rate they're going.
Yeah, except I know who's paying for it, you and I.
Yeah, except we got a lot of members, and AB5 is part of it. We have members who are relocating out of state. They're jumping the state line. Nevada, Arizona, Idaho, Texas is a big one.
Hey, how come they're not coming to Oregon? We have a border there too,
There are a few that have gone north, but the luster on the three West Coast states is really,
they're all the same.
Between frankly. Between the crime and the drug addicts they're letting run the streets, it's really pathetic.
It's
not.
What really bugs me about it is it's just absolutely gorgeous out here. I love the West Coast. I love living here. I just hate the politics.
I alluded to it. I know a lot of people, despise California, but it's primarily on its politics is the reason for that. It is the most beautiful state in the country, bar none. I mean, you can go downhill snow skiing on the same day you go surfing.
Yes, and golfing.
There's no other state in the country that you're going to.
Yeah. I know. It's just stunning from top to bottom.
I wouldn't want to raise kids there. I'm glad I never had that choice in the mid-'80s, and I'm thankful that I did opt for it and raised our kids in a hobby farm in northern Wisconsin. So they turned out real good. I don't know what would have happened if we'd have tried raising them out in L.A.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, great stuff. Looking forward to meeting you and getting to spend some time with you. And if things change, and I know they will, a lot's going to be happening in both AB5 and emissions in California. Can we reach out to you and get you to come back on sometime?
Oh, absolutely.
Fantastic. We'd love that. All right. Thanks again for today, and have a great rest of your day. We'll be talking to you soon.
Yeah, same to you, Kevin, and your listeners.
All right. Take care. All right, we are going to open it up for calls. It is a free-for-all. I don't have any calls on the line right now, and that happens when we get a guest and we just get talking. It was kind of fun to go back and reminisce with somebody who started as an owner-operator about the time I did, a couple years ahead of me, not many. Actually, we bought our first trucks, I think, within a year or two of each other, pretty close. And Joe's had kind of a similar career, moved out from being an owner-operator to work in other areas of the industry, and he's been very involved. So it was kind of fun just to reminisce about some of the early years in trucking back in the 80s and early 90s, and a lot of things have changed. So looking forward to Joe's presentation at NASTC this year. So I'd love to see a bunch of our tribe there. It would be really cool to have a big Let's Truck turnout at this event. Sounds like it's going to be an awesome event, too. I'm really looking forward to it. So if you want to jump in, I'll hang out here as long as we've got calls. 855-950-3835. Well, I should qualify that. I'll hang out for the next hour. We do wrap it up at 11 Pacific time either way. But if you want to jump in, still plenty of time. 855-950-3835. Calls are starting to come in, so I'll hang out here for a little bit and we'll take them. Let's get started in Indiana. Jeff, welcome to the program.
Yeah, last week you had talked about, or the week before, about calculating your net worth and knowing your numbers and whatnot. So I've been tracking mine here for about the last 10 years or so. I just turned 59. So maybe about 6 years ago, I became a millionaire, per se.
Ah, congratulations.
Yeah. And I was well above a million till January of 21, and then my 401k lost $175,000 of balance.
Don't you hate when that happens?
Yeah, because I figured, well, my wife and I will live on $40,000 to $50,000, and it's like, well, that's just 3 years I lost in 6 months. That's a kick in the nuts there. So
yeah,
it's coming back, but it's coming back, and well, I'm up to $500,000 in 401k. I have a $400,000 house. We just bought. I never thought when I was 20, starting out as goofy and having fun partying and stuff, that I would be a millionaire at 55. But hard work, dedication, knowing your numbers, not living a super extravagant lifestyle, certainly got to where I am. We lived in a house for 30 years, sold that for $250,000, and then paid cash for a $400,000 house. So,
oh, nice. You know,
it's just nice to.
When we look at that, and
it's nice to be in step 7.
Absolutely. When we look at this issue and we look at people who have done this, and they've done it as owner operators or drivers, and it's not voodoo. It's not black magic. There's nothing mysterious about it. There's a formula, and it's really not that complicated. It's math. And, you know, a lot of people think that this isn't achievable for them for some reason, maybe because how much they make or whatever. But I've seen people build incredible amounts of net worth on very little revenue. And I've seen people with tons and tons of revenue never build net worth. It's not about how much money you make. It's a formula for managing all of that money properly. When you have a business, you have 2 opportunities, because in a job, all you could do is go try to find a job that pays more. But in a business, you have so many ways. You could increase your revenue, decrease your expenses. You could work more if you want, because it's your business. So you've got lots of options, but it's also more complicated when you're running a business. Because sometimes some people get so wrapped up in trying to run the business, they never pay attention to their personal finances. Most people who generate $1 million of net worth in their lifetime are small business owners or independent contractors. That's just a statistic. But anybody just about can do this with the right plan. It's just math.
Yeah, well, I know you follow Dave Ramsey. It's 20% math and 80% mental or attitude or how you want to approach it.
Yeah, good point.
Because what did I see? 45% of households could not handle a $400 emergency.
Every time I see that statistic, I am so shocked by that. I've had times in my life where I felt like maybe I was there, and I've been almost bankrupt a couple of times, but it didn't last long. Once I identified, hey, you're really screwing up here. You've made a lot of bad decisions. You've learned now, and you know how to go back and fix these things. You got to go fix these things. So I've been at the bottom a couple of times, but not for very long. I can't imagine the stress caused by the fact that you realize you can't handle a $400 emergency. I can't imagine how much stress that creates.
I know. I had a 7-year-old Buick, and I just wrecked it. Airbag deployed. Lady pulled out in front of me, and so it's totaled. And I think if you can't handle a $400 emergency, how would you handle if that was your only vehicle and you had to wait a month to get some money back and now to go buy another vehicle? There were people that would have their lights shut off.
Yeah, here's what happens, though. Unfortunately, in this country, we've been so loose with credit for so long that even that person that can't handle a $400 emergency when their car breaks down. Now, let's say the repair's going to be $500 and they can't handle, $500. Here's what they can do. They can go down to Drive Time and just buy another $15,000 or $20,000 car. And they do.
Yeah.
That's the problem. We keep giving these people a way to extend their misery.
Yeah.
Right.
And they were probably still paying on the car they wrecked.
Exactly. That's what I mean. And this is what happens.
So now they take that $15,000 car they just bought. They owed $7,000 on the old one, and the new guy will roll that finance into it. And now they have a $15,000 car they borrowed $22,000 on, and that one's not going to last.
Yep, exactly. And we wonder why.
It's just a perpetual cycle.
And it is bad enough in today's world that sometimes these people end up with nothing. Why do we think our homeless population is exploding the way it is? I will say that most people that are homeless have some sort of a substance abuse issue. That is very well known. That's the most common reason for being homeless. But we have, in the last couple of years especially, we have seen people without those kind of problems and even families fall off the edge. And it's because we never taught them financial literacy. We don't teach it in school. Most people aren't getting it at home because their parents weren't financially literate. And then we have industries like payday loans and car loans that will just keep giving these people credit, and they allow them to dig such a big hole that there's no way out.
Well, I'm just for transparency, I'm not a truck driver. I'm just a small business owner. But you wanted to call in with just normal everyday people. But I volunteer for a troop of in the Boy Scouts here, and we have our fundraiser, our popcorn sale, and someone donated us a Square to take credit cards. So after we have a sale, I get a report that says, if you want your money now, just for easy numbers, we sold $100 worth. For your money now, we will send you $92. If you wait 48 hours, we will send you $97. I'm like, well, I don't need the money, so why would I take 3% less for 48 hours? But isn't that what your factoring you've alluded to is?
Oh, yeah. People don't understand the time value of money, so they think percentage is percentage. But it's not. They say, but it's 10%. It doesn't matter. It's 10%. No, it does matter. When we say 10% and we're talking about finance charges, we always assume that's an annual rate. If it's anything other than an annual rate, you have to go calculate so you know what your annual rate is so you can compare it. And I can't seem to get people to understand that. They think, no, I borrowed $1,000 and I had to pay them back $1,200, so it was a 20% rate. No, that's not true. We have to look at the time.
Not if you did it in 60 days.
Right. But trying to get people to understand that, they scream at me that I don't understand math when I try to explain that.
Yeah. No, I hear it.
Yeah.
There was a story back in the 80s. There was a story back in the 80s where these rent-a-centers came out, and somebody had written an article on when VCRs first came out, this say $500. But there was an article somebody had written on the $5,500 VCR.
Right.
They would continually rent out the same VCR that cost them to buy probably $250 back then.
Right.
But they were paying weekly, and if they didn't pay, they got it back and rented it out again. And they brought in it's 20 times the price it cost them, and people don't understand that. If you're paying weekly on a VCR, that you're going to pay 3 times the amount.
Well, this happens. I've worked with owner-operators that when I dig into their finances, because that's what I do, I work on their tax returns, their financial planning. I had guys who were in lease purchase programs, or they had their own authority and they were factoring. Both of those things are outrageously expensive. They're just a different way of doing things, but they're very expensive. Instead of a lease purchase, go buy your own truck. It's a lot cheaper. Instead of factoring, use your own money or your own credit. It's a lot cheaper. And then on top of that, in their personal life, they were using rentals like this for furniture and things like that. And I added up like 15% of their disposable income was going to unnecessary costs like this. That will wipe you out.
Yeah, because that's what, I just say at a $50,000 income, I mean, that's $100 a week.
Yeah.
You know what you can do with $100 a week?
A lot. Yeah. But when
that's $5,000, and that if people can't afford a $400 emergency, they're pissing away $400 a month.
Were you listening earlier when I talked about these new internet banks?
Yes.
Their whole,
go on.
Their whole sales pitch. Every one of these commercials, their big sales pitches, you can get your direct deposit 2 days early. Now, they're spending a lot of money on this advertising. So it must work because they've been running these same ads for as long as they've been in existence. So it tells me this advertising works, but it is completely nonsensical. Somebody explain to me how there's any benefit to this.
Yes. Well, the first time you said you get a 2 day, you get it on Wednesday instead of Friday. Well, then it's still 7 days every Wednesday.
Or plus I have to request it early every week, or I go back from now I didn't have to wait 7 days. I had to wait 9 days. Right?
Nice. So maybe just that 1 week, I guess. I don't know that it was the 31st and the first was coming and you needed it to pay rent or something?
I don't know. I don't get why this is such a big sales pitch for these things. It just makes no sense to me.
Well, it works. Otherwise, there wouldn't be payday loans and this kind of thing. And there wouldn't be factoring if people didn't use it, right?
No, absolutely. And they wouldn't keep running these commercials. But you see this person, oh, I'm so happy I got my payday deposit 2 days early. Once, that's it.
Yeah. But just getting back to my car wreck where it was that just the peace of mind, knowing everyone was okay and it's just a vehicle, I just went, okay, I'll just we had an extra vehicle that we didn't use, but planning and not buying and going to Hawaii every year in my 30s and 40s and 50s. I have that money and just the feeling and the peace of mind and not stressing. And I mean, I'm already under stress and trying to get the stress protocol I've been doing here for 3 years.
Oh, good.
The finances is not one of them. Is that the finances don't ever enter into my stress.
Yeah. Exactly.
Because of what I've done in the last 30 years.
Good. All right, Jeff, I got to move along. Calls are piling up on me. I've got something I want to address before I grab another call, though. Earlier, Stephen had called me the beginning of the show today, and he was talking about some of the debates we've had going on Twitter Spaces. And if you've been listening, it's a whole different format, and there have been a lot of debates and a lot of people yelling over each other. But I think there's some good stuff coming out of it. We're going to keep doing them. But a lot of the debate has been with the officers of this new Owner-Operator Association, North American Owner-Operator Association, I think that's what it is. And the argument earlier today was if you are leased to a carrier, it's just like being an employee. You don't have a business. Now, I just saw a tweet again from one of the officers of this association, and it is about a bill. Somebody's introduced a bill that would stop truck drivers from being exempt from overtime. So right now, as a truck driver, you're not required to pay a truck driver overtime. There are a couple states that have fought this. Washington, I think, fought this for a while. I don't know if they have a different law in the state. I think they might. It's kind of a weird issue because we're crossing state lines all the time, but we don't pay truck drivers overtime currently, federally. Like I said, there might be some states, I'm not sure. So somebody is proposing a bill that you would have to pay drivers overtime. I have almost no opinion about that because I don't really deal a lot with employee drivers and their pay. I deal with owner operators. But I find this post from this association really ironic, given the fact that we were just arguing about, are you really an employee or do you really own a business or not? Here's what they posted about this issue. It says, and this is from one of their officers, it says, and what good is that going to do owner operators in my situation? Meaning, if this passes and you have to pay truck drivers overtime, this owner operator is saying, what good is that going to do me in my situation? Do you think the brokerages are going to pay my company or me overtime? No, hell no. Why would they? You are a business. Why are you trying to piggyback on rules that are for employees? If that's the case, if you want overtime and you want all this protection from the federal government about how you get paid, then go be an employee. Instead, they're trying to tell people like me at one time that had trucks leased to carriers that I didn't really have a business. I was just an employee. And here they're basically begging to be treated like an employee. They can't seem to make up their mind on this issue. That is completely backwards. Why would you think that because there's some law being written for employees that it should affect you as a business owner? I don't get it. Let's go to the phones. Let's go to Mississippi. Terry, welcome to the program.
Hey, Kevin, how you doing today? One thing I wanted to say about the factoring, that I use factoring, and it has become an excellent service to my business because I don't have to qualify people.
If it's done properly.
And I don't have to chase my money. Yeah.
Right.
And I don't have to chase my money, right? I've tried it both ways. When I first started, hey, I had plenty of money. I had to watch, but it's like, you have to really work at collecting that money and keeping track of that money. And it's like, there's an expense there.
Correct.
So you have to kind of weigh it. It's not just about, the interest on the money.
Well, the reason I make it about the interest on the money is I agree with you. It is another tool, another service I could use in my business. It's like, do you really want to pay a broker and a dispatch company? Some people do. Some people say, look, I pay them and it's just easier on me. I don't get it. But it's like, do you really want to pay a mechanic or work on your own truck? Do you want to pay an accountant or do your own tax returns? I mean, you got to figure out what you want to do.
Sure.
All I want people to understand about factoring is and I just give some generalities. If you are paying a 3% factoring fee, I just want people to understand that cost is really similar to paying 36% on a credit card. That's all I want people to understand is how much that service is costing you, so then you can make a good decision on whether or not there's value there for you. I've never said you should never
Sure, because
do
if
this.
I took that 3%, and if I kept that 3%, I invested that in the stock market over 20 years. Look how much money. It would be a huge amount of money. So there's a big cost there. But if I have one invoice that's not paid properly, or I pull a load for one crooked person that's in between me and if this stuff happens, right? Then there's every bit of it.
Well, and here's something else that
I'm just saying there's a service there.
There is. You're right. And we should evaluate that service, but people can't evaluate it because they don't understand it. And the industry keeps this confusing for that reason. And then there's another one that I usually don't even get into because it gets too confusing. You can choose recourse or non-recourse factoring. And if you choose...
Sure.
You can choose a type of factoring that if the original customer doesn't pay, you still get paid and the factoring company eats the loss. But that costs you even more. And you try to explain that to people and they just don't understand the whole issue. And they just want to fight and say, oh, well, no, percentage is a percentage. I only paid 3%.
And I think a lot of it depends on who your customer is. Myself, I use the load boards and I pull
Correct.
For a lot of different people.
That
So, it works for me where it might not work for the guy that has found the 3 brokers, that are going to take care of him, and he's not going to have to worry about whether or not he's getting paid.
Yeah, it's not as necessary. It's easy. Some of these people we work for have apps and quick pay options that they don't charge for. And so, yeah, if you get a couple of good brokers, you probably have no need to factor at all. If you are in your operation dealing with new brokers constantly, you have to invoice under a bunch of different systems. If you can have that handled and get a decent fee on it, it sometimes does make sense.
It does. But hey, the real reason why I called, I am trying to determine, okay, what is the value of $1 today as compared to 10 years ago? I hear a lot of people say, hey, I'm making, $1 a mile. My profit's $1 a mile. And 10 years ago, you didn't even hear about $1 a mile. Well, how does that compare?
Wait. Are they trying to say 10 years ago rates were higher than $1 a mile?
No, they're saying that they're really not saying. They're saying that now I'm clearing $1 a mile profit.
Oh, okay.
On my business, right?
Right.
And 10 years ago, you didn't even hear of that. Well,
that's correct.
How does that compare? Was it like 10 years ago, 50 cents a mile would have compared to $1 a mile now, right? Just about. I mean, does money double every 7 years? Is that still true?
Don't confuse that doubling every 7 years with anything about the economy. That's an investment concept. Two really different things.
Yeah, I get it.
So, and one of this is hard to separate. Here's why. Over time, we have way too many factors to try to compare these things. Over time, we have inflation. So now if we wanted to compare this, we'd have to go through year by year during those 10 years, figure out what the inflation rate is and back that out, because we don't want to compare inflationary numbers to non-inflationary numbers. So we'd have to take inflation out. And then we're in such a volatile, and I would say that 10 years ago, it was like 75 to 80 cents a mile that a small handful of people were achieving. And that kind of compares to our $1 plus a mile now net. So it wasn't 50, but it was probably about 75 or 80.
Okay. Yeah, I just, it's happened because, 10 years ago, I could buy a brand new Freightliner for around $100,000, maybe $110,000.
Oh, come on.
What do they cost now?
Oh, wait a minute.
180.
There's no way 10 years ago, unless you were buying a stripped day cab. Those numbers don't sound right to me, and I'll tell you why. 10 years ago, we were heavy into selling gliders. And I knew the price on the gliders compared to a price of a new truck. New trucks are $130,000, $140,000 10 years ago.
Okay, well maybe they were. It's hard to remember years, and that's a good mark there. I remember going to a truck show in Louisville, and the guy told me I could buy that Freightliner on the floor for about $96,000. But that might have been 12 or 13 years ago.
Even that is a
that might have been a little longer than 10 years.
It might have been longer, and it might have been a really stripped out truck. I'll tell you, the last truck I was able to buy for less than $100,000, new truck, would have been an 01 Freightliner. So we're talking 20 years now, 20 plus years. I was able to buy an 01. Would my 01? No, my 01 was a Volvo. So maybe it was my 05. Might have been the 05. A day cab, single axle day cab I got for 90-some thousand. It was the last truck I ever bought under 100,000, and that was 20 years ago, and it was a single axle day cab.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I'm just trying to make some comparisons,
Yeah,
what things were costing.
Well,
the costs have gotten crazy. I went and got a pair of gloves the other day at TA, and they wanted $25 for them.
Yeah,
and they were on sale. It's a pair of gloves.
So inflation across the board has gotten insane. When I go look at how many cars in the U.S. now sell for over $100,000, I'm shocked. When I look at the price of homes around me, I'm looking at homes that are selling for $350,000 and $400,000 a square foot, and they're builder grade. They're not even upscale, and they're selling for those kind of prices. Everything in our society has gone through the roof. But if we look at truck prices today, used truck prices are about exactly the same as they were 10 years ago. The used truck prices have plummeted again, and new truck prices are coming down as much as possible. But the new truck manufacturers have to deal with all the inflation, whereas the old trucks, that's already baked in.
Yeah, well, when you buy a used truck, then you've got to work. You got to repair it. You're going to pay. I mean, you're going to pay high rates.
Yeah, but all I'm comparing is the cost of a truck with 600,000 miles. It's almost about the same as it was 10 years ago again. But you're right. The work we have to put into it now is going to cost us a lot more than it did 10 years ago.
Well, hey, it's been great talking to you, Kevin. I got to bounce. I got a delivery I got to make here, and I got another one I'm going to try to fit in today.
There you
go. I appreciate you. I really enjoy listening to you. You have a great day.
Thanks for the call. You too. Let's go to Florida this time. Tony, welcome.
Hey, Kevin. You doing all right?
I am doing wonderful today. I got a good night's sleep last night. I'm feeling pretty energetic today. I spent the entire weekend in the garden because there was zero wind this weekend. I mean, we had no wind whatsoever to get out on the water with, which is unusual for us. So I took advantage of it, and I spent the entire weekend in the garden, and it is looking incredible. I got everything done in the garden I wanted to get done, and I'm fully planted for fall already. Oh, no, I can't say that. I don't plant garlic and onions till next month. But other than that, I'm fully planted.
Oh, that's bittersweet because I know you wanted to get out on the water, too, as well. You were saying that. So, you found something else you could do.
You know, the struggle is there's two things I really want to do in my off time right now. I want to be in the garden, and I need to. One of the bigger I make the garden, the more work there is. And I was actually getting behind. So I got caught up. But the struggle is I want to be out on the water or I want to be in the garden. And I'm just decided I'll let the wind dictate it. If there's enough wind, I'm going to be out on the water. If there isn't, I'll probably be in the garden. Today's not looking good either for wind.
Interestingly, I just had a thought cross my mind. It's funny how the wind comes from the direction of California. I don't know. You want to know what I did?
We have a weird situation here because I live in the gorge, and that's why this is such a great place for wind. The Venturi effect kicks in. When air has to move through a small opening, like a gorge, it's a narrow opening, it speeds up. That's what happens. That's what a Venturi on a carburetor, that's how all of that stuff works. When you force air through a small opening, it has to go faster. But we could get the wind from either one of two directions. Because we're in a gorge, the wind can only blow either east or west. And we look for winds coming out of the west blowing towards the east. Some days I'll wake up and they'll be coming out of the east, and I don't even want to go out on the water then because it's just a mess.
And of course, I forgot, you're way above California. So if it was hot air, maybe, then that joke would continue. But
yeah.
Speaking of carburetors, you want to know what I did?
What?
We found out what that chirping or choo-chooing or chugging sound was in my turbo, or in my, you said it was something coming from the exhaust. Do you remember that at all?
I do. Normally,
this is a Packard, of course.
Yeah, normally when we hear that kind of weird chirping kind of sound, it is an air leak somewhere, and many times it's like an exhaust manifold, or we've had a couple engines that the ACERT can sometimes do it between the two turbos. But a lot of times when somebody describes a noise as chirping, we look to exhaust and leaks.
Yeah, and for all my owner-operators that are dying for me to call you out on this having your authority and the clock watchers, and yeah, they're all wannabes, and I'm just going to say I'm watching. And for those people that do want to say something, take pride in having your authority, okay? You don't need to be a dick. I could, but it's just going to, just take pride in that. Kevin, as I was at the Petro in Joplin, and they did diagnose that is the turbo bearing, I remember thinking, with all the tasks that I have, I'm not trying to put anybody down. I just remember thinking, how is this humanly possible? Those were my only thoughts.
No, I get it.
All the work I have to do.
I know. I get it. And it's why there's lots of ways to skin a cat. There's lots of ways to own trucks and make money in this industry. I've done many of them. I've never done a lease purchase, and I've never been an employee driver. But as far as, local, regional, authority, no authority, brokers, no brokers, lease to a carrier, I've done a lot of those different things. And I have to say, by far, not even close, my contract at FedEx was the best I ever had with trucks, hands down. The amount of money I made for the amount of work I had to do was really, really minimal. And then the ability to sell it when it was all over with. That was just a great business to own. It was a tough decision to sell it. I mostly sold it because I was bored with it and I wanted the cash to invest into this business, and it worked out good. So, but it's hard to compare how much money I was able to make in that contract for very little work. And that's the case with a lot of fleet owners over there. Let's go to Arkansas. Cody, welcome to the program.
Hey, Kevin. The chime card you're talking about, the 2 days faster is referring to people that are getting a paper check from their company. When they get that chime card, they're able to have it direct deposited. And the direct deposited is 2 days before the paper check.
Right, but
most of those folks can't get.
Hold on a second.
Yeah, you're right.
Because on the paper check, they either got a paper check every 7 or every 14 days, right?
Yep.
So to get it 2 days sooner only works one
Wednesdays.
time. Right. It only works one time. Yep. So you're right. It's okay that you can do direct deposit and it's all easy and all that, but this is like their biggest selling point. You watch their commercials and they make a big deal out of this, and I don't understand why people don't understand this is not a big deal. You get an advantage one time.
Well, they also, the people that I know that have those cards can't get an actual bank account because they screwed the banks over and owe typical banks money. So they go to the chime card. Yeah, it's just another one of those things where you said it earlier and it was brilliant, I thought, just extending somebody's misery.
That's all they're doing with all these ways of giving somebody money early. There were these apps that I was seeing advertised a year or two ago. Maybe it was a little longer than that. I don't see many ads for these anymore. But there were these apps, like one of them had some goofy name like Bob or something. And you could borrow, I don't know, you could borrow money against your paycheck. It was basically a payday loan in an app is what it was. And the fees were, they make it sound like, oh, well, you can do this free. And they all disappeared. So I haven't seen an ad for those things in a couple of years. I don't know what happened to all those either.
Not enough people going into it, I guess.
Yeah,
I know what you're talking about. I've seen them.
Yeah, all of these things, payday loans, they're really just ways. Here's what we have to remember: whether you're using a credit card to buy stuff and not paying off the balance every month. If you use credit cards and you pay your balance off every month and use it to get the points, that's good. You're creating an advantage. Most people use credit cards believing that it has improved their standard of living. Oh, whoa, but if I didn't have this credit card, I wouldn't have been able to take that vacation, or I wouldn't have been able to buy this furniture. Or they use credit believing that it improves their standard of living, and nothing could be further from the truth. Every time you borrow money, you have to pay for it. The money you're paying to borrow money could have been used to improve your lifestyle, really improve it. You didn't improve anything. You ended up spending more money this way. You've lowered your standard of living by using credit. Because you have less money to spend. I know.
I mean, the only way that you know it is go through it, and tired of living in that struggle of it, and then do the research and, as you say, the hard work to understand what is going on to get out of that cycle.
Yeah. And we can write all kinds of laws about interest rates, and none of those interest rate laws matter when it comes to things like payday loans and factoring, and because they're exempt from a lot of those laws.
Because they're predatory, right? And they go out. Yeah. I'm user of all that stuff, not the Chime loans and everything, but, the predatory loans I've learned the hard way.
Yeah.
Being 32,
unfortunately,
not knowing the ways of the world.
Yeah, unfortunately, I know people in their 60s that still do this kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah. I meet people like that, too, and it just boggles my mind at how, people like the owner-operators and everything that you talk about all the time that don't know their numbers, that don't, and I see them all the time on Facebook griping about rates and everything, and I'm just like, how do y'all get to the point to where you can buy a truck and run it and not even understand all these things? And I understand it, and I can't even do it.
Exactly. I know. And again, none of this stuff is overly complicated if you are taught this early. There can be a lot to it. There can be a lot of different issues, but nothing is overly complicated. If we were just taught good financial practices at home, that would be wonderful. But so many people don't know it themselves, so how do they pass it down to their kids? And we certainly don't teach anything like this in school.
Yep, and I don't know why we don't.
I don't either.
This is more important than algebra, trigonometry.
Absolutely.
I don't read and I don't write very well, but, they spend a lot of time in school on that, and money is your whole entire life. You can't do anything without money.
You know what else is weird? How many of those things we were taught how to do are now done by something other than our brain? Like, I think you should know math. I think it's really important to know math. Math is really powerful, but there are a lot of people that have a hard time subtracting, and it doesn't really affect them. We have calculators. You can figure out these answers all day long. Now we have computers that can write for us, and AI is coming along, and you're not going to have to use your brain much. Overall, every decade we use our brain less and less, but that's not a good thing. To me, all it does is create more opportunities for people to take advantage of you.
That it does. I mean, I'm one to speak. talked to you multiple times. I was in a lease purchase, got out of it, went to company driver, now at the union job transporting the trucks. I don't know if you remember me specifically, but I've called you a whole bunch.
The difference I see here
is
you've been learning over time. None of us were born with this information.
Yes.
We weren't taught it in our schools. If we weren't taught it by our parents, and I wasn't, my parents did not manage money well at all, ever. So they certainly couldn't teach me how to manage it well. School didn't teach me how. I, like most things, I'm self-taught.
Yep. I mean, I pay attention, and I've learned a lot from you, and I really do enjoy listening to you, and I really appreciate it. I mean, I'm kind of lost when you're not on. So.
Well, I appreciate that, and it also sounds like, though, you learn from your own experiences, which is, that's really what I think the biggest mistake we have made in our school system is that we don't teach people how to learn. That's what's missing. We teach, all we do anymore in our school system, our government indoctrination centers, is teach people how to memorize information to pass a standardized test. We base almost everything now in school on these standardized tests, and we waste all kinds of time getting people to memorize things. And unfortunately, you will forget all of that stuff because you didn't learn it, you memorized it. There's a big, big difference. Once we learn how to learn, then we can start learning from our own experiences. But you wonder why some people seem to keep making the same mistakes over and over, because we don't teach people how to learn anymore. We don't teach people problem-solving skills. We don't teach people troubleshooting skills. If you don't figure out how to develop these skills on your own, you're probably never going to come in contact with them. And it's unfortunate. And it seems to be getting worse every decade. All right, I'm looking at the clock, and we're out of time for today. We're going to wrap this up. I have no idea what is going on my schedule this week. Let me think. I haven't looked. Kind of took the whole weekend and just played out in the garden. I wasn't playing. I actually got a lot of work done. I'm feeling it, too. I'm a little sore today. I have no idea what my schedule is. I should probably go check that and see what's going on this week. We will see you back here tomorrow for the Power Hour. I do know that. So we'll see you then. Be safe, be profitable, be fit and healthy. Always do the hard work and master the journey.